Hey, everybody. Very excited that we're going to be jumping into some often forgotten or even completely suppressed history. Once again, today, I'm always impressed whenever I sit back and listen to Marty Sieff go off into a creative compositional modality when it comes to dealing with topics that tie together history, psychology, what could have been, what should have been, what wasn't. Why wasn't it? Who failed to be the better part of themselves at different moments when they really should have been? And right now, we are going through a historic global transition, a systemic breakdown, and a fight for a new system, not dissimilar in so many ways from what was experienced over a century ago, leading up into World War I. Hopefully, today's situation with 8 billion people, nuclear warheads, things that were not around a century ago, is not going to befall the same tragedy, the same terrible trajectory. But the potential is there. And if we're not aware of what mistakes, what toxic ideas and actions that came out of them resulted in things like World War I, then we're more likely to repeat them. So, Marty, I'm really, really happy that you pitched this topic to me. I'm fascinated about what were this assassinations sans frontiere concept, and what were the assassinations that gave rise to World War I. And like usual, after Marty's class, we're gonna have a short Q&A session. Of course, we have a hard stop in about 2.5 hours, so we may not get as much satisfaction in the Q&A period as we might want, but who knows? Otherwise, Marty, I'm gonna leave the stage to you, and we'll just go with the flow.
Okay, thank you. This first, of course, my usual apology, as everyone here who's born with me before, people like Jenny, Jerry, Noel, do, I go off on tangents. And here it makes it even worse because the tangents are programmed into the structure of the presentation. The most notorious assassination of all time, of the 20th century, certainly, was the murder of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914. And even 12 years, almost 112 years later, I am astonished to discover that it is grossly misunderstood. And you make very good points, Matt, as always, in the introduction, but most of it is sloppy scholarship, willful stupidity, and superficial views, because there was no need for a cover-up. All the appalling all along, but nobody wanted to look at it for reasons of usually anti-German bias and gross ignorance and incompetence. And its story. And we will be reassessing it. But I will also be looking at it in context of two more murders that took place within a month, both of which are always presented as having been apolitical, carried out by crackpots who were just responding, of course, well, political reasons and because they were frustrated, what have you. But no, oh, by the way, Matt, I am coming in choppy because you are coming in choppy to me. So,
Oh, no, it's fine. It's actually it's on me. It's my connection that's rough. Yours is fine. Everyone can hear you okay.
okay, that's most helpful. Again, if anyone else has different feedback, please give it to us. But we start as Julie and we sing in The Sound of Music at the beginning, which is a very good place to start. And we start with the familiar beginning, except we're going to find it's not familiar at all. It's just very unfamiliar places. The murder of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914. First of all, in 1914 and even after World War I, the world was willfully innocent. We did not have widespread propagation of non-major Western nations, much less in the United States, but overwhelmingly in Britain, or in France, but overwhelmingly in Britain, were in charge of the narrative demonization of Jews. It was an evil German plot, or the Kaiser was a wild lunatic, perhaps not quite Hitler, but almost as bad, who gave the fatal green to the Austro-Hungarians. The Austrians, aristocrats who actually led the world into catastrophe, are always let off the hook. The Russian court. Conspiracy theorists since the 1930s have loved international finance as a key driving factor. What is involved in Austria, in Russia most of all, and also in France and Britain, we find that the financial people are almost nowhere to be seen and are taken by surprise by the catastrophe when it comes. Does that mean it was an accident or well-meaning incompetence? Certainly the British Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, was the most stupid and incompetent we had until Keir Starmer himself, even more than, or at least, or as much as, arguably, Neville Chamberlain. But taken by surprise, hopefully fails to stop it. He is not an active participant in driving the forces for it. What we find when we look at the mechanics of what drove the Archduke to Sarajevo, the actions that propelled the Austro-Hungarian government afterwards and that pulled in the Germans haplessly after that, and most of all, the very sinister deep state that take place afterwards. The British, of course, are involved, but they are not the prime players. And the Germans certainly are not either. The prime players are unfashionable prime players who nobody bothers looking at. But the and there are big black holes where the documentation has been destroyed. It's even more compelling. And that is the deep states of Russia and other assassination plots take place that are essential to propelling Russia and France into what is planned to be a war of aggression and annihilation. And here we have an enormous big lie exposed, because throughout the Western world for the past 112 years, Germany has been held to blame. And Germans, like the 1960s in Germany, have played major roles in this too. Fischer looked at theoretical German plans for expansion in Europe and around the world, and especially at the expense of Russia, and claimed this is proof that the Nazi state of the 1940s was already taking place before 1914. And that is simply absurd. It simply is not true. What Fischer is looking at, as academic historians love to do, is pipe dreams. Papers, discussions, hypothetical discussions by obscure, extremely low influential bureaucrats bouncing ideas back and forth. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely if we had all the finances if we could break Britain's economic blockade, which the British weren't even practicing in Germany at that point, and we're able to get all the control of the resources of Ukraine for ourselves and take it away from Russia. It's not part of German policy or serious German policy, even by the most militant and stupid and militaristic of German are not there. But what you do find is something that has been all too familiar with us in the United States since the 1940s onwards, from the days of Curtis LeMay and Lyndon plans to inflict genocide on the entire populations of Russia and China by thermonuclear war back in the 1950s under Dwight. Plots and plans of the deep state and the serious military planners if and when war comes and they are determined war to come. The worst of these plans does not come from Germany. It comes from France and Russia, and there are parallel plans which feed into this independently, which fits directly into the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Now, we shall come to the Russia-French plots, which are the real punchline in this, and the real bottom line as part artists, Sarajevo, June the 28th, 1914, re-examined. Most of all, it is a study in incompetence, but it is also a study in the manipulation of power in a incredibly stupid and incompetent state. Now, again, I want you to look at this not from the point of view that people did innocently in 1914 or even 1919, 1963, and of 2025. We are looking in this in terms of what we know about the Kennedy assassination, about the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King, and other convenient deaths that have happened since and continue to happen to this day, about the power of deep state security organizations that are laws unto themselves, that have no whatsoever, that have agendas of their own, and will pursue those agendas with utter ruthlessness and recklessness and stupidity, regarding anyone else once in the way. And we shall also look at the obvious evidence that was there all along, that has been documented for more than 100 years, but is outside the parameters of what people comfortably think in their assumptions, that they do not see them. We do not see things that are not there. Don't. Or whether we do not see things that are there if they fit our view. If you look at the few reports we have from Native Americans in the Caribbean and Aztec eyewitnesses to the appearances of the ships of Columbus in 1492 and Cortez about 25 years later, people could not believe what they were seeing. Seeing these enormous sailing ships, these galleys with enormous sails moving without oarsmen, as if by magic, seeing men ride horses. The Aztec accounts sent back to the animal, they were not animals and men riding them, that they were new life forms, that they were what we would call centaurs, that they had human heads who were directing animal bodies, and they must from the animal bodies and got off them, and then got on again. But they did not realize they were seeing riders on animals. They had never seen this before. They had no horses previously. With what they were seeing. And what people even to this day see in a state of innocence, not even inflicted on them, but because people want to be innocent, is they refuse to see the evidence. Hundreds of archivists, reporters have documented for them for more than a century, and that has been staring them in the face. First of all, 1914. And why did he have to be assassinated? Again, as is so often the case in human history, if we look at our own individual backgrounds, the very fact that we are all here and we all know the different overlapping backgrounds we all come. Bless you, Jenny. You know this is a hobby horse of mine, and I know your path is parallel to mine in this too. We do not simply come here because we are, we always thought the way we think. We came here because we learned when we were relatively young to distrust, or at least have some doubts about identity and conventional wisdom or economics that we were taught. And we learned afterwards in our innocence that we had prices to pay for this, that if you don't conform to what everybody else sees in society, are living in the Middle Ages. Thankfully, we are not being burned at the stake, at least so far. But there are prices to pay. There are certain benefits in society we will not get. Your husbands and wives and boyfriends and girlfriends will leave you. You will find new friends, thankfully, who are usually vastly better and more valuable than the old friends who drop you like shit. And the world is different. The world is different. We all came here to explore new ways of looking because we found the world was not as simple going to be. the Archduke Franz Ferdinand is like this. He is presented in the West in a very unfavorable way. He is a blustery, ultra macho. One favorite recreation was slaughtering enormous numbers of innocent wild animals who were not predators, who did not have a chance against him. His hunting lodges are filled with animals, with animal heads. Not a very nice man, you will agree. And he starts off as a militarist. The greatest is when he is heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, to appoint a bosom friend of his who is a hard drinking, a guy who knows how to put these damn bloody Serbs in their place, who has no time for these damn Slavs whatsoever. A good, sound, solid fellow, a guy you can have a drink with. A guy with you against revolutionaries and liberals and socialists and ultra conservatives and LaRouchites and the rest who no appointed places, right? And he makes him in 1906, 1907, when he's already heir to the Austro-Hungarian Habsburg throne, those in Eastern Europe for 800 years, a throne that held huge power over Central Europe for 400 years before the Romanovs in Russia ever came on the scene. For 500, half a millennium, before the Hanoverians became the royal family of Britain. That's how far back the Habsburgs go. And he makes his friend Franz Conrad von Hudson head of the Austro-Hungarian army. He makes him chief of staff of the imperial army of the Empire of Central Europe. And it is the most catastrophic appointment in human history. You might say that Truman and Eisenhower are parallel this when they raise up Alan Dulles, who finally brought down to the US as Eisenhower's personal choice. And Eisenhower, for all his efforts at producing successful efforts and making himself appear moderate afterwards, back to John Kennedy finds a criminal state within a state, a neo-fascist state within a state, already pumping endless drugs and prostitution, and toppling governments, democratic governments, wherever it can across the world. And he tries to deal with it honorably and courageously, and it costs him his life. Appointment of Alan Dulles in 1953 as DCI was not a wise choice. And we use the same prism earlier. Of course, there's one big difference, because Eisenhower never regrets appointing Dulles. He never tries to fire him. But Konrad von Hotzendorf, and this is one of the first unexpected ones to view the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his murder. Franz Ferdinand is John Kennedy. He is an earlier John Kennedy, because President, although in respect, as Matt and Cynthia especially have documented, we know he's an advanced progressive, a courageous social democrat from the word go, and this is true. But he's also like Richard Nixon. They were bosom buddies for 15 years till they fell out over the ultimate prize, the contest for the presidency in 1960. And who they even took holiday trips together as congressional fact finders in the late 1940s and early 1950s. And Nixon is so heartbroken when he thinks Kennedy had many genuine illnesses in 1954 that he has a virtual breakdown as an incapable of working for a couple of weeks to this close bosom buddy. And they're not gay friends, but they are soulmates. They know each other as they really are. And Kennedy and Nixon, until political ambition got in their way, revered each other. So again, we see people through different perspectives. They are not all what they appear to be. And Kennedy beats Nixon in 1960. in a rather claims there is a missile gap that threatens the survival of the United States of America. Now, there had been such a missile gap from 1957 to 1958 because Eisenhower and his team were slow to wake up the implications of Russia's ballistic missile technology. And there was a year of opportunity when Russia could have fired thermonuclear weapons at the United States and directly targets the United States could fire back because the US would only have been able to use very short range tactical missiles fired from Europe or bombers, which were already extremely vulnerable, directed from the United States and from Alaska, from European and Turkish, and the Russians could have fired missiles that would have hit their targets within 30 minutes as early as the 1950s. But by 1958, US pan-Aryan supremacy had closed that gap. And by 1960, the US was ahead, but again, by far, in first strike, preemptive strike abilities under Eisenhower. And Kennedy, as well as Nixon, knew it. But Kennedy made these false allegations, and Nixon, in the interests of what he knew about national security, refused to make this an issue in the 1960 election, for which, of course, he got no thanks from the liberal democratic little Boy Scout assholes who regarded him as worse than Hitler and Stalin and Satan combined, like David, the guy who wrote the best and the brightest, better forgotten. Name it, Peter. You know it.
David Halberstam.
Yes, bless you, thank you. Then Halberstam. And at first, Kennedy is a hawkish president. He's hawkish over Berlin, and he's very hawkish when facing the genuine Soviet missiles in Cuba in 1962. But the Cuban Missile Crisis sobers President Kennedy up. It also sobers up the hugely risk-taking, up to that point, arch gambler and this mass murderer, which he had certainly been, Nikita Khrushchev. And for the rest of their time in office, Khrushchev and Kennedy genuinely come together to try and establish real détente and also to bring a lasting solution. They, of course, both are against doing so, but they both are determined to actually end the thermonuclear standoff. And President Kennedy becomes, as people in this group know, and as again, as you, Matt, and Cynthia have done so much having on, and you're not the only ones, of course, many others have too, but President Kennedy is a genuine martyr for peace. I would maintain that the church started over 60 years overdue to make President Kennedy a saint. And I don't care what he was involved with Marilyn Monroe. Plenty of saints openly recognize him to sainthood, precisely as you say, Jenny, to having backgrounds like the rest of us. In other words, at times darn embarrassing and dubious, and with many details which we might like to coyly hint at, but would like no further investigation into it. But when the chips were down, they delivered. And President Kennedy most certainly did that. Besides, he's Irish. And what better background can you have for having a good, credible saint in the church, except maybe being Polish, of course. Now, same story with Franz Ferdinand, a man who loved playing at war. And unlike President Kennedy, he hadn't been in real war. President Kennedy's a real hero. He fought in World War II. He'd shown extraordinary physical as well as moral courage and bravery before, which is one of the reasons that all the generals, none of whom had ever seen a dead body in their lives, thought they were hero in war. Because President Kennedy was a real hero and a real man. And most of the warmongers who plotted his assassination, all of them, in fact, were not. Now, Franz Ferdinand is actually a phony tough. Like I say, he loved to slaughter animals. Left to war a year. He thought he was an expert on war when he really wasn't. But he changed. And he came to be he came to the capability of war, so what it would do to Europe, what it would do to Central Europe, what it would do to his own beloved, enormous, ancient Austro-Hungarian Empire. and what it would do to the scores of millions in that enormous empire, which at the time had more than twice the population of Britain. And he becomes, above all, appalled by the Frankenstein monster he himself has created. Between 1906, 1907 period to 1914, the Archduke's personal choice as chief of staff of the army, and Field Marshal Franz Conrad von Hotzendorf, demands preemptive war against the terrorist state of Serbia 25 in Russia, which is determined to support Serbia through thick and thin. And that would mean a full-scale war between Austria-Hungary and Russia, automatically lead to a general European war on a scale not seen in 100 years. And Konrad von Hotzendorf does not care. And he keeps pushing forward. But the Archduke Franz Ferdinand does care. And he isn't a very bright man, but he isn't a totally stupid one either. And he's in his 40s. And he's vigorous. Many practical people, he can see what's in front of his eyes. He attends the Austro-Hungarian war games year after year. And what does he see? He sees of brave, gallant, Habsburg loyal, Ukrainian, Slavic, and Slovak soldiers, all loyal to the Habsburg Empire, all of whom love being under the Habsburg Empire, all of them being exterminated by Joseph Stalin or being enslaved by the fake democratic state of so-called Czechoslovakia when the Czechs enslaved the Slovaks with the blessing of the Western powers after World War I. All of them desperately look back to the Habsburg era as a golden age. But at war games, they are horses, and they are marching forward in brave line like the British soldiers going to the Somme. And against them, there are theoretical machine guns firing. And none of the generals who Konrad von Hotzendorf has appointed pay any attention to this. It doesn't fit their own brilliant, theoretical, calculated, academic plan. He has written books on tactics of war, so he knows all about it. He never lets messy little things like facts or realities get in his way. But the Archduke is an intellectual. He doesn't read books. He doesn't read textbooks. He just looks at what is in front of his eyes. And what does he see, bless him? He sees if we go to war against even the Serbs, and they have heavy artillery and machine guns, our losses are not going to be theoretical. All these hundreds of thousands and even millions of brave, patriotic boys who are loyal to the Habsburg throne are going to be slaughtered for no purpose whatsoever. And he doesn't want it. So when increasingly from 1907-08 onwards, whenever von Hotzendorf urged war against Serbia, the heir to the throne says no, and he vetoes it. Now, this is not widely recognized at the time, because again, people do not look at you as you are. And I think with this audience especially, virtually all of you see that. I have the way you're nodding your head, Peter, exactly. I mean, look at all of us here. What have we been seeing in our times? Sweet, nice, innocent, educated ladies, sweet little heads, right, Jenny, to express any view different to anything that's said by the learned PhD or junior curator of the New York Times on the other side of the dinner table. Right? We have unfashionable economic views which fly in the face of David Ricardo and Adam Smith, and we don't believe in free trade anymore. And we believe in such monstrous, evil, Nazi, racist things as economic tariffs to protect the jobs of hundreds of thousands of millions of people in Canada countries. And we're evil enough and Nazi enough to believe this is a moral policy. How shocking of us all. How shocking of us all. Oh, we refuse to believe that poor little Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy all by himself. And then his brother and Robert Kennedy, and always people opposing the conventional free trade liberal consensus and unlimited arms purchases and the Vietnam War simultaneously. It's just individual little crackpots who kill them all, and it's all evil American society across America that is responsible for this. Oh, you could never find such violence in modern England. No, no, no. Or in the city of London. No, unheard of. We don't look at what's in front of our eyes, and we don't look at the evidence that is there. When the Archduke Franz Ferdinand went to Sarajevo in 1914, it was typical of the man. He was being stupid and principled and brave and knowing the risks he ran at the same time, and there were human factors involved as well, because of the incredible complexities, which are, of course, widely reported and understood, of Serbia versus Austria-Hungary versus Russia versus. There are endless complexities involved in the politics of the Balkans, and Otto von Bismarck had approved that Bosnia taken Austrian control in 1878 with due respect for its own local cultures, but the Austrians, of course, pushed their case rather too hard. No, it's like a damned lie to call them fascists or tyrants, compared with all the regimes that followed, including the wonderful Yugoslav state from 1918 to 1940. Which always viciously repressed all Catholics, half the Orthodox Christians, and certainly all Social Democrats in Yugoslavia viciously from 1980 until it broke apart in civil war and was half welcomed by the Nazis when they came in 1941. Apart from the Serbs themselves, everybody else in Yugoslavia were far happier on the Austrians even than they ever were under King Alexander I and his successors as rulers of the wonderful, virtuous state of Yugoslavia afterwards. But in 1914, there was when the Franz Ferdinand went there, it was like whenever Queen Elizabeth II or King Charles, as he now is, of course, then was, would visit very wisely on their part, very seldomly. They would visit Northern Ireland, very seldomly. And the security screens to protect them, of course, were enormous because there were so many people in the Irish Republican Army and its supporters who were ready to kill them. Quite a number of people in the Protestant community who were ready to kill them too, because they felt they weren't being supported enough, or because they wanted to blame. They thought if they could take a pot shot at Queen Elizabeth or Prince Charles and blame it on the Republicans, then they could have the crackdown of their dreams on the Republicans on the last wall. That's what happens in these mad civil war situations. You see the same thing on both sides in a heavily polarized Israel against the Palestinians to this day. You see it in an enormous out-of-control Ukraine. Little wars metastasize into big wars, and people involved in little wars become so caught up in their little wars that they are perfectly ready to do what Dostoevsky predicted to, that they are ready to destroy the entire world and the entire universe if they can imagine they can still get up and take their morning tea the next morning. That horrific, strange, terrifying, bizarre nature of human psychopathic psychology. The same in Serbia in 1914. So a plot is arranged, but it is not a simple. First of all, Princeps, I said, look at the Archduke Franz Ferdinand through the lenses of him being John Kennedy. He is a devil sick of sin. What saint? Or he's like Thomas of Becket. Remember King Henry II of England's boozing buddy, who the king sets up as Archbishop of Canterbury. And the one thing the king, his old friend, drinking buddy Tom, who he chased all the whores in England with, would actually take Christianity seriously and take his responsibilities to the church seriously. And he does. The king is outraged. He believes that Tom à Becket has betrayed him for God, and he'll never forgive him for betraying the king for God. And so he doesn't even order the murder of his old best friend. He simply says, "Will nobody rid me of this turbulent priest?" And this is the way the chief of staff of the Austrian has to view his old drinking buddy and best friend, the heir to the Austrian throne, who is preventing him from declaring a preemptive war on Serbia. Will no one rid me of this turbulent Archduke Franz Ferdinand? And of course, there are lots of people who are willing to, because Serbia backs the Serbs in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Serbia is a terrorist state. It is much more a terrorist state than Syria was before we toppled it. It is much more a terrorist state than Libya was before we toppled it. So I personally, as an Irishman, I saw too many Irishmen killed by the Semtex plastic explosive that Muammar Gaddafi, for no other reason, posturing and wanting to feel a young heroic revolutionary, gave to the Irish Republican Army that killed thousands of people and provoked the pyramid, of course, as well. So I am personally delighted that anybody who is too, I doubt we'll find it in this audience, but any of you who have a squeamish, please switch off now. You will hear what I'm about to say. I am delighted that Muammar Gaddafi died with a broken bottle up his bum, being hunted down and destroyed as an individual. Human, I think 2011. I'm delighted he died that way. The evil little prick deserved to die screaming that way. But he had been a figure of moderation and peace in the wider scale. They have led to the enslavement and misery and poverty of scores of millions of people in Libya and throughout Africa, because over the previous 15 years, Gaddafi, who had learned some moderation and responsibility in his long 40 Libya, had cracked down on Islamic fundamentalism and had also provided a high standard of living for his own people while keeping Western oil companies out of ill-gotten gains, and the British, incidentally, were lusting after as early as 1947, when a French general who came to an unfortunate end in a plane crash was the one figure standing away from 67. The man who had been the liberator of Paris in 1944, who I gave a previous presentation on here. So Gaddafi deserved to say, but Gaddafi was not killed because he was standing in the way of virtue. He was killed because he was protecting the living standards and safety of his own people. Another complex figure who learns and evolves in his life to be better than he had been before, and who, like the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, with his life. Now, Franz Ferdinand was a blustering man. He was quite a bully personally. His staff looked upon him in terror, as the late Prince Philip of Britain's staff did. I met Philip on several occasions, was introduced by his staff. And you could a look of whipped concentration camp prisoners to them, or at least of abused children. You know, the terrified look in the eyes, the cringe that's in the body language, the way they leap at even his most mild and civic talk, as if you know a talking psychopathic bully, which you are, who'll rip your shreds off your back or wreck your lives and career at the drop of a hat just because it pleases them to. Prince Philip of England was really like that. I can at least indirectly testify this because I met him on several occasions, and he was always very nice and pleasant to me. But I've been subjected to my own share of psychopathic teacher bullies. Most of them were not that, most of them were admirable. but one or two is enough for you to remember all your lives. And I'm sure there were others among us here who will remember. I think you remember it well, Peter, from your early Navy days. You meet one or two pieces of shit like that, and you never forget. And a continuing frustration in my life is this day I cannot hunt down any of these bags of shit in their 80s or 90s and terrify them to death by shaking their throats and screaming abuse at them if I've waited 80 years, 75 years to do so, because I don't think there should ever be a statute of limitations on bullying or evil. I really don't. I really don't. And he was personally, but he had another side to him too. He was a devoted family man. He loved his wife and his 6 children. And he was devoted to the cause of peace. And he was also, ironically, something of a Democrat. He didn't like democracy in principle, but he believed that the ethnic rights of the Czechs and the Slavs should be protected from their main oppressors, who were not Hungarians at the time. That's another big lie. In the light of World War II and a truly monstrous Hitler is imposed upon the Austrians and the Germans of pre-1914 when they were not like that at all. It very uniquely stupid Franz Josef had given the Hungarian aristocracy full power over all the peoples of their Eastern Empire in 1867. And they used them to crack down hard on the Slavs. And a repeated pattern of Austro-Hungarian domestic politics was that Slavic populations continually looked to the Habsburg Austrian royal family and aristocracy in Vienna to protect them from the Hungarian aristocracy who directly controlled them from Budapest. And Franz Ferdinand, and as a result, the Hungarians who ran the eastern half of the empire hated him too. So he had made powerful enemies. He had made enemies of the Hungarian, and he had made enemies as well of his own deep state, of the people. Who do we trust to be the most patriotic? Who does President Trump trust to be the most patriotic, selfless, idealistic protectors of peace in America? Why, the generals who run the Pentagon, of course, and the unlimited, and all the absolute truth they pump out to the world every day on Fox News. I have repeatedly maintained to anyone who would listen, which apart from you, a handful of you, is nobody else at all, that the way to influence American policy is not by writing papers, or not by appearing on other media forums, or not by running humble podcasts, which I and my friend, wonderful, brilliant, and fearless Perry Nero Taylor in Sweden, which we do to a handful of like-minded people. And if you aren't signing off to our channel, Capitals Uncovered, please do so. And recommend some name we can get still. We're crawling up in the hundreds of figures right now. And you will be disappointed. You'll find lots of fun stuff there. But that's my own approved ad for the presentation. What else do we find? We find that deep states follow their own interests, and nobody is allowed to get in the way. A political leader, President Kennedy to the Archduke Franz Ferdinand to President Trump, who gets in the way of the established narrative, is therefore by definition a coward and a traitor. And we all know what has to happen to traitors, don't we? And this is what happened to Franz Ferdinand. The Archduke is to visit Sarajevo. He actually goes there every year anyway, because he takes his duties as head of the de facto commander of the Austrians seriously. And there are annual military maneuvers to be held in Bosnia. And this makes sense because everybody knows that if war comes, it will be war against the terrorist state of Serbia. And as I said, Serbia is a literal terrorist state. It is the only state in Europe that is run by a government and a royal family that got there through cold-blooded, vicious murder. The royal family, the Obrenoviches of Serbia, from 1878 to 1903, had been approved by all the major agencies to rule Serbia at the Congress of Berlin, presided over by Otto von Bismarck, and with full approval of the Prime Minister of Britain at the time, and at the time. And the Prime Minister of the time of Britain who approved this, by the way, was one Benjamin Disraeli, whose name, of course, we find popping up in interesting circumstances all over the place, and other areas as well. But sat on this, and it worked for 25 years, until the King and Queen of Serbia were hunted down, multiply shot, and then their bodies hacked to pieces. I do not mean just stabbed. I mean the bodies were literally cut up into small pieces thrown separate out of the window of their palace. And the man who commanded this and pumped some of the 30 bullets into the king and 18 bullets into the helpless, innocent queen of the night was a man known by the code name Apis, like Colonel Drakunovic, who was the head of Serbian military intelligence at the time, and was going to be the dictator head of the Serbian deep state for the next 14 years, until he himself rather belatedly ends up in front of a firing squad. As many about situations, it was a death too good for him, much too good for him. And of course, the reason he's finally shot is the same reason the head director of Central Intelligence, George Herbert Walker Bush, in 1975 to 1977, blithely presides over the decapitation, not just of the CIA top tips, so many of whom commit suicide or accidentally killed by their own guns or drowned while kayaking and other unfortunate accidents at the time, but also the worst heads of organized leads to Chicago, Sam Giancana, a man whose favorite relaxation was torturing to death victims with cattle prods in his own basement, is shot in his den in another Chicago before he can have a chance to be forced to testify before a congressional committee only days in the future on the assassination of President Kennedy. What a coincidence. And yet, who's that memory? The genuinely fearless United States Senator, Frank Church, who wanted to get to the bottom of all this, dies a few months later of an agonizing cancer that moves unusually virulently and quickly and unexpectedly on him. A cool question to ask, certainly not by the Washington Post or the New York Times. Last week, the Washington Post was forced to fire 500 of its 800 journalists for financial reasons. I already had reasons to like Jeff Bezos. I've benefited from Amazon.com endlessly over the past 20 years. I now love Jeff Bezos. He tried to save and make it an honorable news organization. He failed to do so. He's cutting his losses. All the parasites who licked off him shamelessly over those years. Good for him. Even if he doesn't give me $100,000 a year job as a blogger, as really he should. I'm all in Mr. Bezos's corner, because the Washington Post has done procedures and cover-ups to the world for the past 65 years, and a belated accounting is long overdue. A belated account, and I am the former chief foreign correspondent. The word I say. Now, again, we're running over lots of places different here, and we're still only at assassination number one. It is unbelievably hapless, and the security is non-existent. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand is riding in a carriage that is more violent than Northern Ireland has been in the past 50 years. Everybody knows he is surrounded by people who want to hate him and kill him. Everyone knows the Serbian government state has put us in the head. Yet he is allowed to ride just the way President Kennedy rode through Dallas, in an open, not in a closed carriage, which was provided to some degree already in 1914. But no, pulled by full ceremonial, pulled by horses, an open carriage, open to the public, an open car. It wasn't, but it is an open touring car, just like President Kennedy's car in 1963 was open. So you could have a nice, clear shot from the grassy knoll. Oh, did I say grassy knoll? Of course, from the 11th floor of the book depository. And the Black Hand, the premier murder organization, which is directly in Ministry of Defense, Serbian Ministry of Defense itself, has 7 different assassins lined up along the route. 7. And they all are in the wrong places in the crowd. And one of them, a particularly repulsive young jerk called Gavrilo Princip, is actually having a morning call. He's so useless and hapless that you can only basically train him to kill people and pull the trigger on a light automatic weapon or revolver. So he can't hold down a regular job. So he's usually starving. And he's an idealist. He has greater things on his mind than holding down a regular job. He has the liberation of all the people, the Serbian peoples of the world, whether they want to be liberated by him and his gangsters or not. Thinking great thoughts. Have we heard this often before? Do we still hear it today? Of course we do. So he's, since he's been given some expenses to cover his murder spree, and so he bought a coffee in a shop for once, and he's actually drinking a coffee when the Archduke rolls by outside in his slow-moving car, and he misses him. He misses him. Eternity will never forgive me in a billion years for not liberating the South Serb peoples. Oh, the shame! But don't worry, history is giving you a second chance. The driver of the car is a very poor driver. He's not doing it deliberately. He's just an inept asshole. And the car jams. And in order to get the car to unjam, the chauffeur of the Archduke's car back to where Franz Ferdinand has dashed, no, to where Princip has dashed out of his coffee shop belatedly with some foam of the cup. They get by those days, but coffee they did have. And he's back within range. And there are no security guards. There is a guard along the route. There is no security cordon. None has been provided. So all Princip has to do is politely elbow his way forward in the crowd with his little, and he fires a handful of shots, and that's enough. And he kills the Archduke, and he kills the Archduke's wife, Sophie. A monstrous figure of evil who has been working for 7 years single-handedly to prevent a general European war, has one last statement of hate to give before he dies. He sees has also been shot in the chest beside him and says, Sophie, Sophie, darling, don't die. Those live for the sake of our children. But she, of course, dies too. This monstrous man. But this monstrous, unlovable man has actually had a friend whose reputation has been trashed through history as much as he has. And notice the main theme I'm giving you so far is not even the details of earlier themes. We see Franz Ferdinand as John F. Kennedy. We see Konrad von Hotzendorf as Lyman Lepnitzer, him as the head of Strategic Air Command, as General Curtis LeMay, wanting a preemptive world war so that we can get them before they can get us. Doesn't matter if, as in Dr. Strangelove, as General Buck Turgidon says. So I'm not saying we won't get our her muffed in a particular, Mr. President. They may get 40, 50 million of us, maybe 100 million, but we'll get all of them. Remember that smile. Remember that look. And Franz Ferdinand has given his life against that attitude. He's been allowed to go with zero security because he must be removed from the scene. Karl Hotzendorf is determined to have his preemptive war with Serbia, even if it brings in Russia and causes a general European war, and he will have that war, and he is relentless, and he gets that war. And there is no security screen for the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And again, another view, someone endlessly cited by Cynthia, especially, bless her, by Cynthia Chung, and also, of course, the late, deeply lamented Colonel Fletcher Prunty, who was head of special operations at the Pentagon. I mean, you could probably pick this up from here, Peter, and run with it. I know you know this better than tonight. What does Prunty say is the first and most crucial element for an assassination to remove anybody you want to get rid of? It is that the protective screen is removed around them first. Again, and again, we are looking at 1914 through the spectacles of 2025 and 1963. We are not looking at 1914 through the spectacles of 1914 or even of 1919 and 1920. We are looking at what is it, but not anyone in 1914. The heir to the throne of all of Central Europe is sent to, and even happily goes, but he's assuming he'll be safe. He knows there's a threat. Hungary has 70 million people. It has the largest military force in Europe, second only to Germany in terms of numbers. And Serbia is this tight people regarded as a pariah by other nations that openly supports murderers and killers and assassins and has done so. So who's going to protect the Serbians? And most of all, the Russians will be. They just see fellow Serbs against the big bad Teutonics. They don't see that a general war will destroy them as well. They don't see this. What man does apart from Franz Ferdinand? I look for peace, but we're going to see him through different eyes too, right now. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. Now, since 1933, certainly since 1930, how do we see the Kaiser? We see the Kaiser as Hitler the First. We see him as a monster who would inflict, it may be not genocide per se, because the Germans never practiced genocide in World War I, on Ukrainians and Jews and Poles from each other. They protect Hungarians from Romanians. They protect Slovaks from Czechs. They protect all the defenseless peoples of Europe from genocide in World War I. And only when the German protective hand over Eastern Europe is removed in 1918 and 1919, just genocide flow over not just the Soviet Union, but also over Poland and Slovakia and the peoples of Transylvania and Hungary as well, and the peoples of Western Turkey as well, at the hands of the victors of War I, other losers. Everything you learned about World War I and its end is a big lie. You have to reverse the polarity. Here's another lecture to give on a future occasion. Everything is the opposite of what you were taught. It doesn't end the killing, it unleashes the killing. There were 1918 and 1922 across Europe than there was from 1914 to 1918. And the perpetrators of the killing, with the exception of communist regime in the Soviet Union, but all the rest of the killing is not done by the Germans or the Austrians. It is done by vicious little national not forces by the French and the British, and given a free political and moral blessing by that worst and most appalling of US presidents, Woodrow Wilson. Everything is the opposite of what you were taught it was. Everything is the opposite of what you were taught it was. And we find the Kaiser's position in this in 1914. Who is the Kaiser? I am now going to give you new spectacle Hubble telescope with which to view the Kaiser, to make sense of his many genuine apparent inconsistencies. Wilhelm II is Donald Trump. The second is Donald Trump. He is a right-wing, tough-talking autocrat who loves to be a bit fake macho and watch Fox News, but over a long period of power, he is committed to peace. He is committed to policies of decency and toleration. He likes to bluster and talk tough. He has his great weakness is not his bluster. He asks his generals to be both moral and competent men, and they are not. The head of the German chief of staff is Helmut von Moltke. Now, Moltkes. The first one is a fascinating human being now totally forgotten in the West. He is revered as a god in Germany up to 1914-18, and then he disappears from sight because he's associated with the great shame of 1918, and Nazi monsters who come up after 1933 have no time for him. He's very similar to two other misleading and attractive and strange people, Diane in Israel and General Vo in Nguyen Giap in Vietnam. Because like them, he is a poet. Like them, he is a sensitive, and like them, he is a beautiful writer. Like them, he loves nature. And like them, he is a passionate student of war. Not the kind of war that I have a cousin like that. And unfortunately, the president fits into this category too. President Trump, bless him, in other respect. He trusts he believes everything he sees on Fox. And that's why Pete Hegseth is Secretary of Defense. And that's why our defense budget, which is now more inept and useless than ever, has now just risen by another 50% to $1.5 trillion. That is not a rise of $1.5 million with an M. It's not a rise of $5 billion with a B. It is a rise of $1.5 trillion. With Senator Everett Dirksen, I never met him. I came to Washington for the first time in 1982. Senator Dirksen, I didn't have a chance to cover in person. He had died back in 1969. But what a man. Cynical, reasonably corrupt as you have to be in politics anywhere. But again, a man with a sense of the public good and a man with a great sense of horse common sense. And Senator Everett famously said about the enormous out of control budgets that Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower both blessed endlessly, as did Lyndon Johnson. But to his credit, John Kennedy did not. He said about them, $1 billion here and $1 billion there. And pretty soon you're talking about real money. Last week, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee told the Breaking Down, look it up, that he and his opposite number, they're both Republicans, but all the Democrats are on board with them too in the Senate, have agreed to, which means it doesn't even have to be formal legislation in the House and the Senate. It will be congressional legislation with all the power. It will have been passed by Congress, but nobody's name will be on it. Nobody will be afterwards for passing it. Nobody will be held accountable. $500 billion will be added to the already record $1 trillion budget. What are they going to spend it on? Well, I'll tell you, it doesn't really matter what they say they're going to spend it on, because it will all be stolen. It will all go into the pockets of the defense contractors. All the politicians and all their offshore bank accounts and all the gold they have stowed away in the Cayman Islands or in West Virginia or heaven the hell knows where. But none of it will actually build what's that work. Build fewer and fewer weapons, and the ones we build do not work. And when nuclear war comes, we have no protection against it. There is no economic can defend or does defend. So why the fuck are we wasting $1.5 trillion a year when we could only be wasting $500 billion a year? Just $5 unwasted. Why waste $1.5 trillion a year? But these, you see, are not, by asking these questions, all of a sudden you're going to have Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. And notice the way names are always combined. America in World War II was the productive genius of the Special hundreds of thousands of aircraft, almost millions of trucks. We put the Red Army on wheels, as well as the United States and the British Army. We fed the war well, and we did it cost effectively. Now, we had a senator who went on to play fake macho games himself, but he had a central role in this. And he deserves to be remembered. Peter, know already. Do you want to say the name, or shall I?
Harry S. Truman.
My God, you and I are telepaths. We both know exactly, don't we? Don't we?
Sometimes.
Exactly. And would you like to explain to everybody how he did it?
He chaired what came to be known as and it was a true accountability committee that he chaired in the Senate, and they oversaw the expenditures in what was then called the War Department and the Department of the Navy. And the estimate that I found in his autobiography is that they managed to save $15 billion in waste, and actually may have had a hand in some like one. And in his autobiography, he said, the Marshall Plan cost us $13.8 billion. My committee saved $15 billion. It was, that's what I remember.
And of course, you remember it far better than I do. Thank you again. Now, only one point I will add, not a corrective, because of course, in fact, which Encyclopedia Britannica ever is anymore, if it ever was. And that is 15 billion 1941 to 1944 dollars, equal 500 billion, or at least $500 billion today. So then it could and was done. Truman's, but they are not allowed to sit in the Senate, and they are certainly not allowed to found and lead defense committees like that. They die of heart attacks, or like Senator Paul Wellstone, in tragic plane crashes. Oh, or like and this is a warning for Jeff Bezos. I genuinely admire Mr. Bezos, and watching him over the years, he really tried to clean up the Washington Post. It was just a Mission Impossible job. He really tried to make it what it ought to have been in the first place. But there was a previous Washington Post publisher who had the same genuinely noble ambitions. Phil Graham, who made the mistake of wanting to leave his wife, the formidable Catherine Graham, and marry his own girlfriend, less than half his wife's age and a lot more attractive. Shot with a shotgun, not even a sawn-off one, at point-blank range. Now, who will believe that anyone will commit suicide with a shotgun at point-blank range, especially when you are about the direction of your paper? But nobody ever asked the question. Of course, I was never asked the question. And again, if you want to read fairy tales in which every word is a lie, and the liar believed every one of his own lies, read that History of American Journalism, they're the best and brightest, by David Halberstam. All the realities are the opposite of the childish, infantile pieces of shit that you will read there. I have got to T14 here. What we have seen here is, first of all, there are two deep states involved in the assassination, the removal of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The first is the state. Conrad von Hotzendorf must have his war. And the second, and now we come to it, is the Russian deep state supporting the Serbian deep state, which leaves us to, because of my own, again, uh, improvidence, I have lived up till here. But the first two murders are essential to bring Russia into World War I. Because in 1910 and 1911, Russia is recovering from solution. Two most powerful figures in Russia are determined that the one thing that will destroy Russia is a war with Germany that it cannot win, and therefore Russia must have peace and friendship with Germany at all costs. And who are these two individuals? One of them is Peter Stolypin, who is the Prime Minister of Russia. Stolypin is going to repair a socialist catastrophe that accompanied the freeing of the serfs in 1861-62. When the serfs were freed in 1862, genuinely kind-hearted and idealistic, but far too liberal. And he was a 19th century czar. What can you expect? But he was a good man and he meant well. And he had his legs and his stomach blown to shrivel for this by the anarchists of the British Secret Service behind him in 1881. His name was Alexander II. But in the freeing of the czars, there was of the serfs, there was a fatal flaw. The serfs were allowed to own their own land, but they were never allowed to trade in land or give up their land, because the sense was that the land was sacred. And similar pictures appear to a more limited degree, thankfully, in the Hebrew Bible. Modern agriculture and prosperity only gets going in Britain in the 19th century. And Chicago was shocking it in the 18th century, when free sale of land by peasants to and from other peasants and landowners is freely allowed. And this serfs to sell their land and make a bit of money from it, and then go to more productive work when they're not capable of actually farming and running their own land, and it allows more efficient farmers. What the communists, they specialized in murdering millions of people simply because they were good farmers and good peasants. That's what communists did. Whenever you have a free market, taxation is kept relatively low. And other parameters such as providable goods and services and standard as raised as they were in America from the 19th century, very much to the 20th century, most of all under the Great New Deal. That's another story. But above all else, you have to have free market. Because the market in land is frozen, Russia's population soared in the 19th century, and the number of famines they had soared as well, because food production did not soar. This is never lingering to the structural failures of socialism that were already there in 1861 and 1862 in the freeing of the peasants. Quite frankly, academics, especially British ones, are too stupid and narrow and incompetent and doctrinaire and socialist to see what is going on, to understand the crucial of free market in land and what it is necessary to generate. But Pyotr Stolypin saw this, and he revised the policy, and he freed the serfs just from overlords who whipped them, and that's obvious, but from their own poverty and for own technological lack of education. And Russian agricultural prosperity soars in the decade before World War I. And Stolypin says, 1908, give me 10 years and you will not recognize Russia. What he means is the peaceful evolution of Russia into a increasingly westernized state, still fundamentally authoritarian, but tolerantly authoritarian, and with generating prosperity and wealth on hand. And sure, in the 300th anniversary of the Romanov dynasty is celebrated. It is celebrated by enormous popular expressions of popular support involving scores of millions of people, and you will not find a single Western Anglo-American liberal academics source that will acknowledge that, and yet look for it. It's all there. It's in the public record. But Stolypin is not there to see it. Because in 1911, Stolypin is assassinated. And the Tsar is present. The Tsar is actually present and sees his prime minister shot two bullets in the chest, blood all over the place right in front of him at Kiev Opera House. Even if you've survived assassination, it really wasn't a cozy life being a Tsar of Russia. To try and kill you. And Peter, you're absolutely right, as I see in chat. Remove the screen. And as Colonel Prouty said, the assassination ensues. I'll give you two recent examples of that. In 1995, the assassination of Rabin, patron in Israel, because Rabin, it's not because of his peace with the Palestinians, which had broken down because Arafat unleashed the terrorists all along. It's because he wanted another peace, which was and he had his own chief negotiating with Syria confirms full agreement had been reached between Hafez Assad and Yitzhak Rabin to make peace between Israel and the Golan Heights back to Syria. But the Israeli state would not have it. And so Yigal Amir, and those disgusting hardline extremist right-wing lunatics who are real, but you can just, funnel them off the street anywhere. They can't tie their own shoelaces. They couldn't possibly get through any security cordon. No, Amir is guided through the security precaution. Yeah, people are told that it's a trial run. That of course the prime minister isn't going to be shot. We're going to do a trial security run on somebody who might shoot the prime minister with blanks just to make sure his security is good. That's how they get him in there. That's how they get him in there. This is all exposed by investigative reporters. It's all exposed. But no, and one should also look at the assassination of the former prime minister of Japan just a couple of years ago, because he was out of favor with the much more green liberal internationalist people who are now running the current emperor of Japan. His closest personal friend outside his own family and country, he openly says, is King Charles of England. Relationship just worth looking for there, just worth looking at. You would think it unusual. I mean, you would exactly think of a Tokyo-London axis, but there was one from 1901 to 1921, and it was central to dismantling the Russian Empire in the 1905 war and in the Japanese occupation of Siberia. It was much more important than conventional Western history gives it credit for. And there's been one again for many years now in different ways, just worth looking at. But why does Stolypin have to be killed? Not just because of the peasants. He's doing something much more unforgivable. He became unforgivable in that Tsar Alexander II had committed in 1881, 30 years before. He has dismantled the secret police. He has dismantled the Okhrana. He is about to dismantle Russia's CIA, just as President Kennedy was going to do in 1963. Now, I admit that's just true. You don't have to believe me on any of this. Where can you find the documented evidence of this? Why, you can all find it within 30 seconds of now, by clicking onto the entry on the assassination of Peter Stolypin in Wikipedia. It's all there in Wikipedia. That Stolypin was dismantling the Okhrana. That the actual assassin is not another idiot starving kid off the street. It's Dmitry Bogrov, who is Jewish, who is educated, who is a lawyer, who has ties to the Okhrana itself. Strong ties. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn, in his masterpiece book, which nobody reads, because the liberal intellectuals basically tell you not to, read August 1914. The first volume All the volumes of The Red Wheel, which Solzhenitsyn regarded as his greatest and most important and enduring work, have been translated into English. They've been easily available for 25, 30 years, and nobody reads them because our neocon friends tell you not to. They just tell you not to. There's no conspiracy theories in them, far from it. There is a different view of what happened in Russia and how uncontrolled liberalism and socialism and sheer stupidity unraveled one of the greatest civilizations as well as land empires the world has ever seen, and led the way a century of genocide on a scale that only the Nazis ever even came close to replicating. Per capita, actually, Mao's communists killed even more people. I think when they're in China because of the huge scale of population. And I am not an admirer, but neither or a champion of Mao's policies at all in the slightest. Wherever you find communism, you will find mass graves on a scale. Oh, just what you will find. That's just what you'll find. But when we go back to the assassination, what is the elimination of the Prime Minister of Russia? The Tsar didn't like him. The Tsar isn't upset. The Tsar was a very unpleasant man. I mean, he has to regret the assassination of the Tsar and the martyrdom of the Tsar, because look at what followed. The martyrdom of 100 million people on an inconceivable scale in the communist madness that followed, inconceivable on the peoples of Russia and Eurasia. But Nikolai II himself was an idiot. He was a dolt, and he was a moral imbecile. Back home that night, he has his own prime minister's blood, who has served him loyally, splattered on his imperial uniform. He isn't afraid. He's too stupid to feel fear. But he isn't sorry either. He's glad Stolypin is gone. He never liked Stolypin. And the Tsarina hated Stolypin. So, he's gone. Big deal. But Stolypin is one of the two great figures who is fully against suicidal war between Russia and Germany. And who is the other? Anyone wants to go for it?
Rasputin.
Rasputin?
Yeah.
Exactly. I shouldn't be doing this. You should be giving these classes, of course. And also, I'm letting you upstage me, the fall guy here. You know, you got the punchlines, man.
I played college ball in law school, Martin. I'm a ringer.
A ringer for them then, Peter. That's what you were. Exactly. Now, this is a strange man. And again, so abused, especially in Britain and also in liberal America to this day. Was he a Satanist? No, he never was, ever. Was he a devout Christian? Yes, always. Was he an anti-Semite who wanted Jews murdered? No. He risked his life repeatedly to condemn pogroms against the Jews. Was he a monk? Yes, he was. Did he have extraordinary supernatural powers of healing? Yes, he did. Many other people have done so. His suspects, and I don't, God forbid I should draw a parallel. I don't mean to, but we look at the Bible. We look at the powers Jesus had, are documented at least by eyewitnesses. Just to say that we're 2,000 years up, but we don't have examples of powers as dramatic as Jesus as anywhere else in recorded history. But we do have repeatedly into modern times people who repeatedly, reliably, now that we have modern medicine, modern video evidence, modern internet tools, the phenomenon of parapsychic healing and by Mekistan, could only theorize or fantasize about, is very well documented. So that first, there is absolutely no rational reason why Jesus should. Oh, that's point one en passant. But But secondly, when one looks at the healings of Rasputin, he did repeatedly save the young. It's a question that he did this. But what else do we know about Rasputin? Was he gay? No, he was not. Did he engage in orgies? In some respects, yes, by that. There was no evidence that he was ever a pedophile. There was no evidence he was ever a Satanist. But he did like to make love to women in the hypocrite or secret about it. His wife knew. His wife, being a Russian Siberian peasant of the time, had, at least in the public view, a very interesting view of it. Shaman, I cannot satisfy him alone. By that point, you probably needed relief from satisfying him. Who knows? I mean, let's not go there. But she knew all about it. He was open about it. He was a slob. He never washed. He appointed his favorites, most of whom were corrupt, and even when the ones weren't corrupt, were just grossly incompetent into government positions, which proved to be constructed during World War One. This is true about Rasputin. So Rasputin had a devastatingly negative effect on the public standing credibility of the family without meaning to lead the way to the revolution. But he was a repulsive slob personally. But objectively, he was a forceful. He kept pushing the Tsar to ease tax burdens on peasants. He supported the great free market reforms that Stolypin had brought in to free the peasants and free them from their burdens. He didn't have a high intellect. And you could not stand around him without holding yourself in perfume and holding a clothes spade on your nose because he stank all the time, even in royal palaces. He may even have seduced the Tsarina. I think that unlikely. No were printed, but the Tsarina was in such a state of hysteria that she might not have even known he was doing, and he might not have occurred. We don't know, and we never will know. Perhaps some diary from the Queen or Rasputin will be found, and then 50 years later will be found to be a forgery. And 50 years after it will be found the claim it was a forgery in itself. No one ever really resolves these issues, but we do know that believed him totally, and that his influence was supreme on them. And above all else, there was this: just as Gaddafi was a repulsive killer by remote distance across the world from the 1970 Olympics massacre against the Israeli athletes in 1972, to with Semtex explosive in Northern Ireland, which the Czechs happily supplied, but which he, of course, paid for. Czechs are armorers. They will give weapons to everyone. They made twice as fighters Hitler in World War II as German industry made for Hitler. You never see that written anywhere. And they used Slovak slave workers as well as Jewish slave workers, of course, to make them. Well, that's the Czechs for you. And nobody ever gives the poor Slovak people a free deal, an even deal. No one ever does. And I Rasputin, like Gaddafi, there's one thing to be said in his favor. Gaddafi, for more than 20 years, blocked the rise of Islamic fundamentalism and the impoverishment of scores of millions of people across Sub-Saharan Africa. He protected the living standards and the safety of scores of millions of people across Sub-Saharan Africa. And that was his bottom line. And Gregory Rasputin's bottom line was that he between Russia and Germany, and he prevented Russia being destroyed in a war against the Central European nations, and he prevented European civilization from being destroyed, and he kept the Tsar, who was a stupid thing, until he was stabbed. When was he stabbed? Can anyone tell me that Putin was stabbed? No, of course you can't. Nobody ever mentions it. And yet it's there in the public record. Others looking. When was the Archduke Franz Ferdinand murdered? On St. Vitus Day, June the 28th, 1814, the great day of Serbian suffering and sorrow, when the Serbian elite are slaughtered on St. Vitus Field by the Ottoman Turkish Army. This date, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was advised to pay a state visit to Sarajevo with no protective bodyguard around him whatsoever. He was shot by a man who was a direct tool of the Serbian Secret Service. And we now know, and my dear broadcast partner, Kelly Taylor, has written a major history on the origins of WW1, pointing this out, that the Tsarist secret police, the Ochrana, knew the plans and supported them. The Serbian terrorist state, like so many of its successors today, by itself couldn't scratch a light off it couldn't light a candle with a lighted match. They had to have funding and directing on everything, and they got it all from the Ochrana, from the Russians. And it is the same Ochrana that enables a nun, a former, she's always described as a prostitute, but she was actually a repentant prostitute who became a nun, and she stabs Rasputin. And she stabs Rasputin on behalf of another monk who had previously been an ally of Rasputin, but had turned against him. And this particular monk, her name is Sonia Guseva, or Guseva, Guseva, Khi, and she changes the course of world history because she stabs Gregory Rasputin the day after, on June the 29th, 1914. It happened exactly the day after Archduke Franz Ferdinand has been assassinated thousands of miles away from Siberia, in another obscure corner. Notice things always happen in obscure corners. Rasputin is not assassinated in St. Petersburg, where the Tsar's own loyal imperial guard will be there. He is home to visit his family, to pray, to meet other people. He's vulnerable. And again, look at 1914 through the 1930s. Kennedy assassinated. Is he assassinated in front of the United States Capitol? No, he is not. Is he assassinated in the White House? Why? No, he is not. So was President Kennedy assassinated? Dallas, Texas, which is run by a city regime and a state regime who hate a Texas political party controlled by Kennedy's own arch enemy, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Vice President of the United States, next in line of succession, who had openly boasted to his mistress, "Those damn Kennedys won't be around to bother me any longer." He is removed from his own protective screen, and he is eliminated. Just as Yitzhak Rabin was not murdered in the prime minister's office in Jerusalem, or in his government offices in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, but while addressing a mass square of Tel Aviv, happily, thoughtfully named in his honor afterwards. It's now Rabin Square afterwards. And this happens again and again. You remove your target. This is why President William McKinley has to be in. That is why the World's Fair in 1901 has to be an industrial whole called Buffalo, which produces passable football teams and nothing else, since his industry has been allowed to collapse, in upstate New York. Any of you ever been to Buffalo? I'm going to be Buffalo. The chance to watch Josh Allen and the Bills in person has not attracted me there. I can watch him on the road. Right? So who went to Buffalo in 1901? So I hold the World's Fair in 1901. Buffalo did have one of the most violent organized cells of anarchists, organized from their London headquarters by British intelligence protected Prince Peter Prokofiev, who was a mastermind of the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881, and McKinley, who has vowed never to expand the United States empire further into the Pacific, never to annex the Philippines, never to liquidate the independent kingdom of Hawaii, who's a queen friend of his, is shot twice by Leon Czolgosz, who has previously been seduced by one Emma Lazarus. Is now the great saint of feminists in America, as well as 1960s left-wing radicals in America, and was the long-time lover and naive twit and one of the puppets of Peter Cook himself. You read what she writes about Kropotkin. He was a genius. He was greater than Einstein. He was much, much greater than Darwin. He taught us science. He taught us biology. This about a murderer who was protected by British intelligence and masterminding the murders and attempted murders of genuinely progressive leaders around the world, from Germany to Japan and Spain, who raised the standards of living of their own people immeasurably. This is who Peter Kropotkin really was. But you don't have to look far to find these links. They are there. But nobody looks beyond the individual in question. And all you have to do is read the newspapers of the time and see the questions that were rightly asked at the time, by not be fully controlled at the time. And then you look at those events again through the lenses of today. You look at the 11th of Russia through the same lens as you look at the murder of President Kennedy. You look at the murder of Archduke Ferdinand. You look at the elimination of Rasputin in 1914, because you see, Rasputin isn't killed by the assassination attempt of June the 29th, 1914. But he is eliminated. He is seriously injured, and he has to rest and recuperate with the primitive medicine of the time. So he is thousands of miles away from the imperial summer palace, where two things are happening in the summer of 1914. Two more things. First, the president of France, a figure of important and evil, who is a central figure in the plotting of World War I. He is much more important than that poor fall guy, the Kaiser of Germany, is. President of France. He is Alsatian. He is another of these people who has never seen, who would faint at the sight of a butterfly's blood in his life, but who was eager to inflict world war and the slaughter of millions of people. He traveled by battleship all the way to Germany, not to Germany, past Germany, to Russia, to hold 2 weeks of secret talks after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. After the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. And he brings with him a larger and more formidable team of military advisors than Winston Churchill to any of his summit meetings with Franklin Roosevelt to plan World War II together in Washington or Quebec. And we still to this day do not know, and we even cannot discuss those meetings, because the papers were destroyed. They were destroyed by the Ochrana during World War I. And the French side are being found. But this only happens, the talks are only held when Rasputin is no longer there to tell the stupid Tsar, do not Tsar telling you to do not give the French the assurances they want for a coordinated attack to destroy Germany. You must not do it. Russia will be destroyed instead. And recovering from his stabbing, which remember had strong Ochrana secret police connections, Rasputin, whose own survivor is physical support and who will be eventually assassinated 2 years later, telegrams the Tsar when the fateful decision has been taken. For God's sake, do not go to war. Rescind this. Rescind this. I plead with you. It doesn't have, but as long as Rasputin has staring eyes is not there to make the difference is not made. On the night that he signs the decree that will destroy, run the entire civilization of Christian Russia and Eastern Europe going back 1,000 years, what does Nikolai I write in his private personal diary? In the Sir Palace at Tsarkaya Selo. I paraphrase slightly. You'll find the details there. It's in all the history books. A pleasant, quiet day. Went sailing with the children. Nothing happened. Kaiser Wilhelm actually knew better. The Kaiser, as I said, we go back to the Kaiser. I come back to my regular theme here. And incredibly, I am more or less on schedule to finish at 4 o'clock, though we have to squeeze Jaurès in there as well. But the Kaiser, I want you to see the Kaiser, and I want you to put on a second set of special lenses. And forever afterwards, when you look at Kaiser Wilhelm II, see Donald Trump. See a man who does bluster, who is a BS artist. And in that respect, like Trump, is a product of his culture. A man who has a patriotic pride in his military, but who, like Trump, has never seen real war. I watched Fox News in Germany, had it been available at the time. And that is the key to the Kaiser. But the Kaiser is not a militarist, the way he even thinks. He is actually a decent man. And his best friend has just been murdered by Serbian terrorists. What are you going to do? What you're going to do? Yahoo, who I don't think is the president's best friend, for all the conspiracy theorists who think otherwise. But they do it superficially go on in person. Suppose he gets shot tomorrow. The president is told it was Putin personally, Mr. President. We have complete proof that he ordered the hit. What you're going to do? People who are emotional and who aren't sufficiently skeptical enough, and you can, more likely, I think the president would be skeptical, and therefore he would be removed. We haven't had a chance to get into Heinrich von Moltke, and I would suggest that we might want to do a separate documentary at some point on Heinrich von Moltke as the archetype of all the American generals who appear on Fox today, and also on Peter Hegseth and his friends. They are the people who don't just start world wars. They are the people who destroy worlds. They destroy worlds. Moltke is stupid, is convinced that the Schlieffen Plan will solve all problems, and he wants endless. He is almost as relentless about attacking France as his best friend Konrad von Hotzendorf is on attacking. And like von Hotzendorf, he's a terrible general. And like von Hotzendorf, he is a coward. He doesn't think the British will dare come into the war. And what follows is incredible. And is, as the whole world knows, planned according to careful railway timetables. And German mobilization insists that the first and second German armies must sweep and outflank, going to the coast, and sweep down into France with overwhelming force. And you have to deploy by rail to do it. And it involves tens of thousands of trains and millions of men. And the planning involved computer days, not a computer in sight, is enormous, but they have done it. And then Britain comes along, and through the fatal intervention, Winston Spencer Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty at the time, insists British survival will be doomed if Germany occupies Belgium's ports. I think what happened after that, the Schlieffen Plan worked in Belgium, tried those ports for 4 years. And Britain's survival was never in doubt. It was British naval power that starved 750,000 innocent civilians, mainly children and elderly people, to death in Germany during World War I. Instead, Churchill, who was the professional head of the British Navy, did not know what he was talking about. Full of shit. He did not know what he was talking about, and his way worked. But it meant that Britain was going to come into the war. Edward Foster, another uniquely stupid individual, nevertheless doesn't want Britain in the war, and he suggests an out to the Germans. And the Kaiser accepted. He says, if you attack France in overwhelming power, but you do not go through Belgium, we will stay neutral. It doesn't matter all these plans that Churchill has produced, that the army has produced. We have a liberal government in Britain. Most of our members of parliament do not want war. And if you just leave Belgium alone, we will stay it. The Kaiser loves it. He accepts compromise. Hitler the First, the Kaiser, accepts the compromise so that he will still have, even if he's forced to have war with France and Russia, he will not have to fight the British Empire at the same time. But there's a problem. Helmut von Moltke suddenly panics. And he has a nervous fit. He falls at the Kaiser's feet. He falls at the earth, and he's seeing the Kaiser's quality leather boots. It must be very satisfying to him. German generals in 1914 were being him into this kind of stuff. Anything that was kinky and leather, he starts with his own teeth. I've never yet checked whether they were false teeth yet. They probably were by that age and time, but it's an intriguing detail I must admit I have forgotten until now. Okay, it's worth exploring. But this is documented. And he rolls his eyes. And when he recovers sufficiently from his fit, he tells the Kaiser, All Highest, you are dooming Germany. The Schlieffen Plan must go through Belgium, otherwise Germany knows. Now, we have just seen the top professional head of the British Navy, a man who boasted of knowing more, again, naval strategic affairs than any other British naval warlord in history. And in fact, it's a lie. He knew less. He was the most notorious incompetent ever to direct the British Navy in times of any major wars. And there's another, I think I've given lectures on this a few years ago in the past, and there are certainly others to be given. He was an incompetent. And Helmut von Moltke I, who had led Germany to its victory in very different wars in the 1860s and 1870. And the first von Moltke had always warned against a war with Britain, had warned against any future wars with France, had said the era of those wars when we could win them and get away with them is past, and better strategies of peace now. But his own nephew ignored him. And now at the crucial moment, the nephew goes mad and melts down. And he says, no, we must go to war with Britain, your all highest supreme warlord. Brings the snake down if we don't. But here's the punchline. He didn't know what he was talking about either. The German general staff had continued for 40 days without invading Belgium. The chief of staff, general staff, simply forgot they had the backup plan. It occurred to pick up a telephone, when he was with the Kaiser, and call Zossen, to call Imperial General Headquarters and ask them, excuse me, General von Ludendorff, excuse me, whoever the hell's on the end of the phone with me right now. Do we have a contingency plan to mobilize the army successfully against France? Well, I can't remember. Of course, he was supposed to be the top professional soldier in the world, and he couldn't remember his most important contingency plan. That's right. When you look at the people around President Trump, or the people around President Putin for that matter, and certainly the ghastly people in line and military, never underestimate their stupidity, and never underestimate their ignorance, because both will be infinite. Both in the survival world lies right now on us being able to notify people, as none of us are really able to, into that. Oh, and I can even go on a little after this. Magdalena, bless you. You always educate me, and now you save me yet again. We can go on a little here. But there, and he doesn't know that they have a plan. He has a plan to destroy France without having to go through Belgium. No, he doesn't know. And he doesn't have enough wit to think on his feet and think, well, I don't know about this all highest. Let's just phone let's phone the Pentagon and see if we really do have to. In the 1960s, US war plans were just like this. Curtis LeMay's plan for a preemptive war against Russia meant that if no automatic peace signal came through, Strategic Air Command would automatically launch 500 Minuteman missiles, each one with 10 megaton warheads, to destroy every major population center in Russia. And you could not merely fire one missile once the failed through hand was activated, and all 500 would automatically launch, and you could not stop them. And more than that, where were the missiles located? They were located all across the northern tier of the United States. North Dakota, Nebraska have even been opened as national parks, God help us, today. Some of them are probably still active. But here's the thing. How are they powered on national grid? Were there power failures on the national grid in the United States in rather cold Nebraska? Just south of Saskatchewan and where have you, in North Dakota at the time. Does the winter get cold there on occasion? Does electrical power sometimes break down? Yes, it does. Have military bases been known to have power cuts? Yes, they have. Do air bases have power cuts? Yes, they have. What happens when power comes back on in a place? You get equipment automatically jump starting that you hadn't started in the first place because sparks jump. Sparks jump. So they any protections against this in the $1 trillion, already 1960s $1 trillion defense program that Eisenhower and Curtis LeMay had authorized for Strategic Air Command. It never occurred to good, wise, philosophical President Eisenhower that such a thing would be needed. It never occurred to macho man we will never be taken by surprise. But what if our own Strategic Air Command system takes us by surprise and destroys the world, General LeMay? What about that, you fuckhead? No, never occurred to them either. I recommend to you all here as well, and they have hundreds of thousands of viewers, we do not. So if any of you go onto them and they ask you where you came from, tell them you came from Rising Tide, and tell them also, please, that you came from my podcast, Capitals Uncovered, with Pelly. There with Taylor. Were also allies of theirs, as of yours, and all of us who oppose the obscenity of madness of thermonuclear war should join together. There's a wonderful podcast called Behind the Bastards, and there are lots of bastards out there from from billionaires like Mr. Musk all the way across the board. Lots of bastards, but they have a whole series on Curtis LeMay and the Strategic Air Command, and it really should be watched. It really should be watched. People talk about this afterwards. After the Super Bowl, give me a holler, man. Now, also, one more assassin. Oh, Magdalene, it's always lovely to see you. And again, today, even more so, since once again, you're my guardian angel. I mean, I don't know how many coffees and Starbucks treats I've promised you and Jerry over the years, but of course, we've gone vastly beyond that for both of you right now. Let's just see what we can do in practical terms. But I have one more murder still to go.
Okay, you go for it.
Okay. Who has heard of Jean Jaurès? I'd hardly heard of him either, you forget. He was the man who would have single-handedly saved France from going to war with Germany in 1914. and was determined to do so. Of the French Socialist Party, polls continually showed he was the most popular man in France. With his political, they had won a working majority in the Parliament of France. The only reason they were not free to implement their personal friendship and alliance and topple the government of France was a typically French reason: another murder, a shooting. His political ally Caillou had been involved in a messy love affair, and one of the people involved in the love affair, actually got in detail, you can look this up, look up Jean Jaurès in Wikipedia. It's Wikipedia. It's all in Wikipedia. Because of a French scandal and a case that was going on at the time, Jaurès could not in the summer of 1914, but it was inevitable that he and his socialist allies, who were determined to end war with the threat of war, not war, but the threat of war. He was the Trump of his day, and he paid for it with his life. 2 days before war was declared, in 1914, Jean Jaurès, the leader of the French socialist movement, a figure of enormous importance in the history of socialism and anti-communist in France at the time, goes to the Monsieur Frey, who is the Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs in France. This is unbelievable, but it's all in Wikipedia. And only you can look it up within time yourself. If you cannot find this within 30 seconds of clicking onto Wikipedia. Monsieur Frey, and I'm pronouncing it from memory, not even correctly, who is the Undersecretary at the time, is informed by the leader of the most powerful party in the French Parliament: we are opposed to going to war with Germany. We will prevent it happening. And what is the reply? The permanent Undersecretary of the Deep State of Foreign Affairs, who is a protege of President Raymond Poincaré, who had just come back from plotting aggressive war to destroy Germany. What does the not even a cabinet minister, but an obscure official, an Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs, tell the leader of French socialism and the leader of the most powerful popular movement, democratic movement in France? If you say that if you go public to prevent war, you will be dead tomorrow, Monsieur Jaurès. You will be dead tomorrow. Well, of course, it was only a threat. And it didn't literally happen. It wasn't true. It didn't happen the next day. It took 3 days to make it happen. 2.5 days to be precise. Jaurès is at lunch in his favorite restaurant, so Parisien, it's in the second arrondissement. It's on Rue Montmartre. Been there many times. Ironically enough, I was a guest. I didn't realize there was a dark joke in the night. I guessed on a number of occasions of the man who was for many years, national security advisor to the prime minister and future president of France. A dear friend of mine who's been going for 35 years, who played his own role in reduced war in the 1980s. And he was very conservative. He was a devout Catholic conservative. Jean-Marie Benoit, a passionate Gaullist, and a great a friend of the United States, but also a great passionate supporter of France having its own independent nuclear deterrent. Because it was, first of all, the more independent nuclear deterrents you have under responsible control, the more likely it is that you will be able to prevent nuclear war, because there will be more unpredictable factors. Hold back the lunatics who will otherwise look for a nice black and white Curtis LeMay solution. All we have to do is take them out and it will go on. Again, not a comfortable thing. Kind of, like Matt always rightly says, not somebody who gives you a false choice between two equally repulsive or impalatable choices, and therefore forces you to choose only one or the other. A man who tries to break you free from that particular dialectical death trap. And he must have been having a joke expense trying to teach me something subtle, or most likely he assumed I was much more knowledgeable about what had happened there than I actually was. But this was either the restaurant right beside the previous restaurant where Jean Jaurès was assassinated. I always forget the name and I have it written down here. But again, look him up. The name is not important, but well, actually it is because you have to trace the individual. The name is always presented again as a nutcase. Barbara Tuchman, again, one of the most stupid and misleading so-called scholars of all time. And yet a woman also, you love this part, she did more than United All Save the World, because she taught a false lesson about the origins of World War I that President Kennedy believed. So a good man and a wise man believed a principle he learned that was a lie from an idiot, but he used it to save the world. What was that principle, first of all? She teaches, and this applies here to what we've already taught, that World War I began by timetable, and you couldn't change the timetable. And AJP, she got this from AJP Taylor. She didn't have the brains to work it out herself. AJP Taylor, who I met in person, you would remember me when I attended his lectures in Oxford in the 1960s, was a repulsive little know-it-all left-wing socialist jerk. Thought everything were all the wrong answers. And he was a contemptible joke as a historian too. His idea of World War II was that the German people were all responsible for something inherently evil in all German people. Or Hitler wasn't evil. Now, here's a new one. You have it's Hitler was innocent, but it was the Jews' fault. Hitler was innocent, but it was Franklin Roosevelt's fault. Here is a new one. Have you ever heard this one before? That's so stupid. Hitler was innocent and pure, but it was the German people's fault. Has anyone ever heard one before? And yet in Britain to this day, he's regarded as a great historian because they still secretly like to be able, to sneer at the Germans. And, it's all their fault. It's never ours. Never ours. Incidentally Jewish and very wealthy New York German Jewish. And of all things, the niece of Henry Morgenthau, Secretary of the Treasury under FDR as well. Political factor into her politics. Well, it does, but in a wider sense. She was an idiot, and she was a liberal idiot. She was so stupid that she revered Joe Stilwell, not realizing he would have hated her both as a woman, but most of all as a Jew, because he was a ferocious anti-Semite. And she writes a book about Stilwell in China in World War II. That I have never found a single responsible Chinese educated person or scholar who was nothing but bewildered contempt for. And she explains the origins of World War I. Or that AJP Taylor was right, it was war by timetable. The Germans created the timetable and then they couldn't change it, so they were trapped into declaring war in Britain as well. So it's just not true. As I originally learned from my friend, thankfully still very much with us. And if you could get him, he should be a wonderful speaker here as well. If he doesn't do William S. Lind, the very eminent military theorist and the great theorist of fourth generation war. Bill Lind, who's now retired back in Cleveland. But I learned this story from Bill. It's even conceivable to me, but I checked into it, and like everything Bill taught, it turned out to be true. It turned out true. In other words, as I said before, the Kaiser listened to his tough general, just as Trump listens to Hegseth, and both of them listen to whatever nonsense Fox News, and that's where you get it from. And they're all wrong, and they haven't a clue. And back in the 1950s and 60s, with the full approval of Eisenhower, Curtis LeMay at Strategic Air Command creates an annihilating system that will set up automatic nuclear war that will destroy and China. Even if China is not going to go to war with Russia, the system is designed to go off automatically. And they never even take into the account the effect that there are parks in Nebraska and North Dakota in the middle of winter where the missile launching silos are located. And they do not have independent power sources for those launching silos will be able to take over automatically when there are power cuts. It just never occurs to them. And none of the electricians who work with them never occurred to them if they had even thought of them in the first place anyway. What were these creatures smoking? They should have been, or something stronger. They should have been smoking something that rotted their brains so they couldn't do any more harm, or that sobered them up. Whatever they were smoking was on the way to killing the entire human race. And the people in 1914 are doing this too. This is why I say again, you look to 1914 through the lens of and what can happen to us tomorrow, and you look at that through the lens of 1961, when we had the Berlin crisis, and 62, when we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and 1963, his martyred memory, and Nikita Khrushchev both stepped away, showing the most immense personal, moral, and physical courage from the brink of Armageddon for the human race. And I don't care how thousands of ladies President Kennedy acted dishonorably with in this context, and God forbid I do care about the hundreds of thousands of innocent Ukrainian Christians slaughtered armpits in their blood in the 1930s. But ultimately, at the end of the day, these two men acting alone and together saved the human race. They are still talking about here, and this is the real lesson of 1914. There is one last point. The individual who shot. Oh, Richard, yes, please. And Thomas, let's talk again or do another session or what have you. I'm sorry, gentlemen. I apologize, Bruce, to you guys. I don't want us to apologize to you for being even more all over the place than usual. But again, we are going places we need to go. This is a maze whose different lead to minotaurs. And think of it, we are in a maze where wherever we go and we get lost, we find a minotaur, a monster at the end of the maze. And in each case, that minotaur must be exalted. That's actually the part image I would like to leave all of us with here, including myself. We are exploring a maze in which every false path we take, and each monster needs to be exposed. So in 1914, they blunder into the war. But here is the Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs, the permanent Undersecretary in France, who has obviously just been briefed on his government's top secret, his president's top secret, and his top general's top secret meetings with the heads of the Russian army to unleash simultaneous wars of aggression on Germany when war will be declared. And they do it. They launch the wars into East Prussia, and all the French armies on the central and eastern, and not to defend Belgium and Paris against the Schlieffen Plan, but to go straight into Germany because they think they will be able to crush Germany. They know all about the Schlieffen Plan. They're just lousy generals. And then all the British and French historiography in World War I is also a lie. It's not that they actually lie about facts. It's that they simply ignore and are pissed, ignorant. Facts, they're ignorant of them all. The facts are these. The French are not attacked by Germany. The French attacked Germany with all their main forces of armies, nothing directly through Belgium. They think their defensive shield, along with the British, can stop the Germans in Belgium. They are wrong. They also are convinced that will sweep all before them and destroy Germany and bring them straight into the Ruhr. Again, they are wrong. The German screening armies destroy the French armies and kill almost 1 million of their soldiers and wound another 500,000 of them by the end of August 1914. American historians are just too pissed ignorant of this, and French historians are too ashamed. So it happened. And of course, it fits into the Anglo-French American narrative that it was evil Germany that attacked the West in the first place in 1960. No, the French who attacked into Germany. And simultaneously to them attacking into Germany, the Russians attacked with two full on East Prussia. And the Germans panic. Von Moltke, who we've already seen biting the boots of the Kaiser, and I want you to remember this image. It's so outrageous that every professional historian you will talk to will be supercilious about this. And then you must all have seen this. I'm sure you have all seen it, and you will all have given these people more respect than they are due, and you will all have tried to tell them truths and facts and documented evidence that you came across in your own research. And what's the answer you always gave? It was never a short answer. I've been on the receiving end of it thousands of times, maybe tens of thousands. You have all been too. Exactly. Oh my soul sister. Richard, JD, you know it. We've been there. The supercilious sneer. This is what told you Trump's policies would not work. There was one lady who I'd been friends on and off with, mainly on actually. I thought she was a bit more honest than the rest of them, a little bit of it. Former BBC editor, rightly loathes Netanyahu in Israel, but also regards President Trump as being a more dangerous Hitler and Stalin and Lenin combined, right? To which I had one response that ended on more than 50 years of previously pleasant and but occasionally civil social bantery. I simply replied, "You're an idiot." And we've all had that. So this scene with the general biting the Kaiser's boots is never supposed to have happened because it's an inconvenient fact. The power of the reality so that it banishes centuries and generations of self-brainwashing. The dignity of history, the dignity of evolutionism, the socialism, the dignity that we of anti-German prejudice, the dignity that we and we alone, as filtered through Harvard, annals, are the know everything and are the guides to everything, is demolished by the simple fact of what happened. And decency of hundreds of years of American democratic tradition is banished by one single image we have all seen. President Kennedy being smashed to pieces by a multiple volley of short-range rifle shots aimed from the front that jerked his head back. As the 8-year-old child watching a Zapruder film could have worked out for themselves. There you have it. And 2 days later, lo and behold, Jean Jaurès is murdered. His killer comes from an impressive intellectual. Here we are. I did have it right. My handwriting was so bad I couldn't read the usual properly. Raoul R-A-U-L Villon. I think V-I-L-L-O-U-N. It's all in the on Wikipedia, so correct my spelling where we're wrong there. He comes from a serious family. He has direct ties to French intelligence and the French Secret Service. Yet Barbara Tuchman describes him as being just a guy who walks in off the street against this Democrat, this liberal, this peacemonger. Have we heard this before? This traitor, this Russia lover. There was one piece of shit down in Acapulco. He told his job and career on the Washington Times 36 years ago. And when he saw one of my arguments for ending the slaughter of the Ukrainian people at the hands of the Russians, he crawled a pro-Russian show, a tool of the Russians. Now, in fact, I worked as an honest journalist for the Russian Sputnik news agency, and I don't hide it, and I was proud of it for 10 years, full time. Many other American colleagues and friends did at the time, including former friends and colleagues of Carter. And Carter personally only had his job, and I saved him from being fired, that he richly deserved to be, by our colleague Richard Gross back in 1991, calls me a Russian shill. Well, he's a part. About fucking shit. I'm passionate enough to believe that when we have liars and cowards and abusers, all the way down from the head of St. Anthony's College, Oxford, who is one of the cabal of four who brought Britain into World War I and to help destroy Europe in 1914, and as head of St. Anthony's College, Oxford, she is, of course, one of the most popular journalists in the English-speaking world. And to this day, she maintains that the peace brought in Europe in 1919, that is bringing us to World War today, was a good, just, and wise peace, when instead it unleashed an era of genocide even World War I had not seen before upon all of Europe for the next 4 years, 5 years. That's something we need to learn. How the years after the peace of the Conference of Versailles were more terrible than World War I was, and how Versailles, now the Senate of Versailles was resurrected in 1989 after Franklin Roosevelt had wisely buried it with Joseph Stalin in 1945 at Yalta, and they were right to do so. And I was certainly I'm not a flag for Stalin. I was condemning Stalin's monstrous genocide at the risk and course of my career. They were smiling and smirking at me superciliously at that, even then in the 1970s. But these people always know when to turn around and go up aside, or hundreds of millions of genuinely decent, hapless people to their deaths. It always happens. But I only mentioned Raoul Vaillant at the very end here. And yet, when Vaillant tried for the murder of Jaurès, he should have been guillotined for it. He is held in jail in very comfortable conditions. 4 square meals a day, visits whenever he wants to. Throughout World War I, he is then tried after World War I. He is regarded as a national hero, acquitted, and he lives on to die in prosperity and peace afterwards. The French deep state, like the British deep state and the American deep state, no power. But to summarize here, I have given far more importance to the first murder, descending importance to the second. But what we have here is central to it all is what was always central: the murder of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the victor of not wallets which are not in league with each other, because that's a question that has to come up too. No, there is absolutely no indication, and this is terrifying and fascinating too. It means that you can have gangs who can't shoot straight, different enormously powerful, wealthy organizations of criminal secret psychopaths working at cross purposes with each other without realizing it. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand, there is very strong evidence, was hung out to dry his own Austrian, which then went on to wage the most incompetent war in human history. They got 2 million of their own people, their best and their brightest, killed, and this was the real reason the Habsburg Empire. The Habsburg Empire had millions of brave, idealistic young men of every kind of Slavic background and other backgrounds, and Jewish backgrounds too, and Russian backgrounds, Muslim backgrounds, and they were all loyal to the Habsburg Empire because they knew it was tolerant and good to them and loyal and tried to be just and protect them, and they would be mercilessly slaughtered by all their immediate relatives, as in fact happened. So he was hung out to dry by his own empire, by the Russian secret police who tell the Serbians what to do. And the Russians are in cahoots with the French deep state because they both surely land destroyed Germany. Hitler accuses the innocent Jewish people of plotting to destroy Germany. Else Hitler said it's a mad delusion and an obscene lie. But of course, there was a mirror image truth behind it. There was a diabolical plot manipulated by demon state-controlled German bisexual predators to enslave and annihilate the peoples of Europe. Except it wasn't run by the Jews. It was run by the Nazis themselves. They just accused the Jews of doing, and haven't all of us been accused of doing exactly what the deep state is doing to the whole Western world? Is there a certain familiarity there? Dr. Pink is not a favorite intellectual for many of us here. We can agree to disagree, but he is, as you all know, of mine. And he calls this projection of the monstrous crimes you yourself want to commit and haven't had the nerve to do so yet. And by accusing someone else to commit it, you free yourself to carry monstrous crimes, but you don't have the guts to look yourself in the face of a true magic mirror. A true mirror of truth still has to be held up to the events, and it is a crucial key to the survival of the world and the prevention of World War III and the preservation of human civilization in our year. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. Hey, that was a tour de force, okay, Martin.
If not a tour, then at least
so
a
that
force.
was
Absolutely,
excellent. Unfortunately, our European friends had to leave because for them it's 6 hours later,
I know,
right?
absolutely. Well, I should tell them they should have been planning to stay up to watch for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, Liverpool we don't need. So, but I'm so very, very glad that you clarified this thing with von Moltke. Because I kept saying, wait a second, is he talking about the von Moltke that is friends with Bismarck? And I'm going like, no, that can't be, that can't be. And then you finally clarified and you said that it's the nephew. I'm glad about that.
If I may, once again, I mean, I'm sorry, I can't resist, but you hit the nail on the head right here. Look at the second von Moltke, the nephew. He's a mirror image. We hear all this talk about antimatter, which I don't believe exists, but he's an antimatter von Moltke. He's an anti-Moltke. Everything that the original Moltke achieved and how he achieved his brilliance as a general and his greatness as a humane human being, all of these things, we need to appreciate the original von Moltke anew and again. Because if wars have to be fought, he shows, along with Bismarck, the way, even if they can't be avoided, the way you have to try and fight them. Whereas the second von Moltke is the opposite of this. Like Konrad von Hotzendorf, he's not just a monster, he's a stupid, what's his name? They had a strategic Air Command again in the 1960s. U.S. generals of LeMay, exactly like General LeMay. He's the anti-Moltke. He's the anti-Sun Tzu. He's war with that these people are evil. And being evil, they are not just evil, like Hitler, they are also incompetent. For all Hitler's vaunted hatred of norms and humanity from the great Greco-Renaissance humanist tradition and the great Western Christian and Judeo-Christian traditions, which are a bit different from each other, but they certainly overlap. All of this, for all the way the Muslim world also understands war and peace through its millennia of accumulated wisdom and experience. LeMay and people like Konrad von Hotzendorf and the second Moltke are anathema to all of this. They are war without limitations. They are war without limits. And as a result, they are nihilists. All they can bring on, as Dostoevsky understood, is endless destruction and endless doom. Sorry, I'm going on as usual.
Yeah,
Richard,
No.
go for it.
Okay, thank you, Martin. That really was a tour de force. There's one thing I want to push back on, and that is that I think that the roundtable folks in Britain may have played a bigger role than you gave them in your talk.
No, I stand corrected. You go ahead, Richard, please, definitely.
Yeah, this is Jim McGregor, Hidden History, The Secret Origins of World War I. He makes a pretty strong case that there was a whole lot of planning over a whole decade or more than a decade, setting up these alliances.
Oh, yes.
So I just wanted to add that on to all the wonderful things you said. Thank you.
We might go into that further on because it's not a subject I want to drop on. I think actually it's a subject you might want to give a seminar on, Richard. And if you are not willing, I think really you should do it. But if not, maybe we should do it just jointly together back and forth because it is a huge subject. I don't want it to appear that I'm ducking it. It is enormous because British policy, Mr. Lord Salisbury, through the 19th century had been precisely to avoid getting involved in wars in Europe. And this dramatically changes in the decade, as you say, before World War I. And the deep state, military British deep state, and the British naval deep state, especially after Churchill takes it over and are central to all of this. Now, I would say my own view up to now, and I stand to be corrected, is that to a large degree, Churchill and his friends are being played for dummies by the French. They're very happy to have the Russians destroy Germany for them. But they do not envisage World War I as in fact it played out. They do not dream that 1 million British dead and 2 million more from the Commonwealth will either be killed or seriously injured in the war, and effectively the British Empire will be destroyed. They do not see any. They are certainly malevolent, and they are certainly building up the risks, and they are certainly on the side of the French-Russian alliance in this. And again, another figure who we should bring back for another conference on this, who has just recently spoken here, and I think you heard him, Richard, is my dear friend, Pelle Neroth-Taylor in Sweden, who has published a measure of World War I of the greatest importance that has been frozen out by most of the main historical review and appreciation platforms and bodies of discussion in Britain. That precisely brings the British strategic calculations and role on this. So I do not want to do another of those ghastly supercilious smirks. Let's practice one of. I know better than you do, but I'm too polite to show it. You and your worthless Irish and Canadian and Midwestern American shit, aren't you? All of you. Not like me and my friends. No, just practicing. And the thing is, you're right. It is much too important
like a conversation
to ignore. So let's get back to it.
Yeah, it might be good to have a lecture where there's conversation with a couple people. You know, it'd be a different format.
With all of us here, let's arrange it. Sure, absolutely.
That's a good idea. Marty, thank you, Richard. Okay. I'm doing a little bit of research myself about the next agreement. And something that has popped up a few times is the influence of the Crimean War on Russia. This whole thing. So I wonder if you had something to say about that.
Again, it's either nothing or everything. There's so much that one can be said. Again, absolutely. And so you and Sherry and Stephen, you always talking to you is a bit like snorting cocaine. It's all the pleasure at the same time. So you short circuit. You don't know where to start. The Crimean War is a turn at time again as it's placed in Britain as a very unimportant thing. British historiography again lies. The way we are told it is the Russians are evil. They had this horrible backwards tyranny, and it certainly was technically backward, enormously so. Under Tsar Nikolai I, the standard of living was miserably low, high. Western industrialization in its finest forms had not broken in, but Western industrialization was brand new at the time. Railroads had only been invented at less than 20 years before. The Morse code, faster than electronic communication, which would transform the world within 10 years, was only being invented. And suddenly the Crimean War is there. Britain has reduced France after 300 years of fear and insecurity, 400 years really, to the main British. France is Britain's lapdog. It has become Britain's military engine in Europe. France is still military supreme in Europe, but politically under the so-called Emperor Napoleon III, it will do anything the British Empire tells it to do. Napoleon III has been put in this position by the British deep state, and the city of London keeps him there. And British money pours into Paris with two predictive results. First, Paris is rebuilt on a scale really 14 redundant sales in amazing glory. And secondly, the gap between rich and poor in newly industrialized France grows to levels of misery and destitution that had not even been imagined before. These two things happen at the same time at 20 years from 1848 onwards. But it doesn't matter because France is doing whatever Britain wants it to do. And Lord Palmerston is the master, a powerful human being in the world, and arguably the most powerful human being who has ever lived to that point. Because telegraph power, electric cables, steamships sailing to the furthest part of the world, the ability to send high-tech armies that can annihilate armies of millions of people armed only with flintlock rifles against you, are employed by Britannically against Russia, against China, against India. South America is being conquered and depopulated on a scale of conquistadors never dreamed of, and the native peoples of Paraguay are being annihilated, not by the Spanish peoples or by the native tribes of the north, but by European settlers who are brought in and organized by the City of London. All the peoples of Tasmania and the southern half of Argentina are the new European colonists under the British Empire in the middle of the 19th century. And the Crimean War is part of this. The Crimean War is really aimed at smashing Russian imperialism and cracking it open. And they find it's harder than they expected. Because while steam engine power can bring them to the Crimea, it can't beat the Russian winter for them, and it can't beat the distances of Russia for them, and it can't beat the cultural conservatism and deep religious faith and patriotism of ordinary Russian and Ukrainian mujiks, peasants for them. So the war stops after a couple of years. But the war is presented in the West as a righteous stand, of course, for the rights of French Catholics and British Protestants to worship freely in Christian shrines in Jerusalem, as if they weren't able to do so before you. And if you really believe that, no wonder so many people were willing to invest in that book. They built about 20 years later, right? If you believe that, you believe anything. No, it was built to crack Russia wide open. And they finally decide there's not much, they can't really do so. But in the protests, they do two other unintended things. Russia, they are. Russia was supreme in Europe again, for hundreds of years and reestablished the dominance of conservative Europe against British liberal dominance in 1815, and more especially after the Russians that failed in 1848, 1849. But now, 7 years later, Russia has been beaten to a pulp by countries that aren't even serious land powers anymore. The French, who lost 600,000 men in Russia in 1812, and the British, who have never been a serious land power at all. So a very nasty wake-up call. And a new Tsar comes to power, Alexander II. And he wakes Russia up. He wakes it up fast. And he wakes up, and he is smart, and he is serious, and he's also decent, and he is courageous, for which after 26 years, after transforming Russia, he will pay for his life. But he does not do this in the Crimean War, does this defeat in the Crimean War. In every major nation, whenever a country loses a war, in real terms and or obvious terms, the government of that country is totally, usually peacefully and sometimes by violent revolution, after the war. It happens every time. And Russia lost the Crimean War. So when the new Tsar comes in, he brings in a totally new policy, a policy of crash modernization. And it works incredibly fast, incredibly well, but it also brings incredibly unforeseen consequences, and it goes much further than conventional Western claims. But all the amazing modernization of Russia in the 19th century starts from defeat in the Crimean War and the mass modernization that follows. The Russian Revolution flows directly from the Crimean. Again, also a lesson in unintended consequences in power. What Karl Popper, who I know is uncomfortable among many of you, many of my friends, and he's again an anti-philosopher, but this is a very important semi-philosophy to hold. And you see it in the chess players. Whenever you see in politics, from Russia to Israel to New York to the Polacks to Zbigniew Brzezinski, whenever you to Boris Johnson, whenever you see an obsessive chess player in politics, I will show you an asshole and a dangerous fuckhead. Because the war, they assume they'll never change. Their pieces can only move according to preordained patterns. And they assume that they will always be the most brilliant person in the world in the room. And that unintended consequences appear from nowhere. They assume that the universe is always there to be totally known. And it isn't. You're talking to a lifetime poker player here. And I never made big money in poker, but I never lost it either. And I haven't played the game seriously in at least 20 years since I left some friends from United Press International who were kind enough to beat me without screaming at every time, which was a useful lesson, not just in humility. Most people too much humility. It was a lesson in realism, which we all need. When you talk about poker, there is always luck, there is always chance, there is always an unknown factor there. When you talk about conceptualizing the world in terms of chess, what Cynthia rightly calls the fallacy of game players, you have fixed rules that you yourself set up, and if the world doesn't go the way you want them to, it's never your fault, it's never the rules' fault. What you don't realize there's some system with you. Popper, at the very least, you don't have to go with anything else similar to that, because I am with you and so many of our mutual friends because really what they want to do is create a moral vacuum, a moral nihilism. These rules don't work, therefore no rules work. These rules don't work under circumstances A and B, therefore no rules must ever work under all circumstances. I'm with them under the limiting factor, but as a general sense for recognizing we need rules to navigate and understand and conceptualize and survive in the world, of course I'm with you all the way. So Popper is a typical European absurdist, taking a common sense point in limits and taking it to an absurd extreme. So that's enough of Popper. But what we have here is at the Crimean War, Palmerston was around the world for a couple of years, or at least imagine they had, which is pretty much the same thing as we see by neo-con cousins in Washington to this day. They imagined they were running the world. They weren't really, but they imagined they were, right? And therefore, when they go into Russia, they set off second level consequent reactions and fourth level reactions that today we are used to from a study of ecology. But in the mechanistic world of the 19th century, they were not used to. They were not used to. Remember, these were not people who listened to Descartes. They were people who listened to Newton. They did not go with the flow as a college, just a true grandmaster of electricity. Benjamin Franklin did. No, they're with Newton and with Hitler. I press A, I've got the strength, you go B. I got the strength now, I'm always going to have the strength tomorrow. F you. That is the British imperialist view on the world from the 19th century. We exterminate millions to death whenever we want to. So if you're an Arab or a Russian or an Indian or a Chinese or a Mexican peasant or a Tasmanian Aboriginal native or a Canada First Native, you don't count for shit, you never will. We'll keep exterminating you tomorrow just as we're exterminating you today, and the world will never change. And that is what led Palmerston. I mean, he didn't stop to, even Henry Kissinger learned a bit at the end. Before he died, a fearful Kissinger, who, of course, as we all know, had eagerly joined the bastardization of Russia in the 1990s and the 21st century, looks at what Russia has become under Putin and looks at the Russia-Chinese strategic alliance, a relationship that has now lasted 25 years and is going stronger than ever. And what does he actually say? Remember, this is the old 98-year-old Kissinger talking, and I heard him in person saying it. It's not the Kissinger who basically told George Herbert Walker Bush, rape the Russians blind, I'll keep the Chinese in hand, you don't have to care about the Russians anymore, Russia is done. And he never truly totally believed that anyway. He pretended to, because he wanted to go along with the macho people and he was cynical enough to do it. That's a Russia-hating view. It's a George Herbert Walker Bush view. It's their view. But what does he finally wake up and say at the end of the day? He becomes a wise one, and he says, when we went into Eurasia, notice he admits, he doesn't say when you went into Eurasia. He says, when we went into Eurasia, I was just 25 years with the retired head of the U.S. Naval War College in Annapolis, Professor Robert Woods, a wonderful man, and a brilliant man, and a good man. And Bob started a student of Kissinger's, working for him at the State Department in the early 1970s. And Bob said to me, and they were still friends to the end of Kissinger's life, he said, Marty, after 80 years in this country, in the United States of America, Henry still cannot quite make up his own mind whether he is one of us or not. Notice he didn't say Kissinger sneers at you Americans. He thinks he's superior to you on the head. No, he is American, but he's also German and other things too. And he himself cannot make up his mind. And of course, this is where the chess model kicks in again, because we are all different things for times. I'm a different me to you now than I will be when the New England Patriots are regrettably being slaughtered by the Seattle Seahawks, and I don't want to see it happen later tonight. We are all different. When I grew up in Ireland in the middle of a civil war, when I realized that there was uneradicable hatred and evil to be removed. In 1958, when I was 7 years old, when Manchester United lost the Britain's Football Association Cup final, the FA Cup final, to Bolton Wanderers in 1958, only months after their team, and I still cry at the memory, after the beloved Man United team was killed in a tragic plane crash at Munich airport. Decades later, for a whole variety of reasons, I came to love the people and city and culture of München, and I still do. But I had this enormous bias against them for so long, not because of Chamberlain and Hitler in 1938, because of the man crash in the middle of winter at the end of 1957. We all see things from different perspectives, but at different times in our lives, we see things different. So I'm sorry, been going on endlessly here. Please, next question, and thank you again for everything.
I have nobody else was putting in their name here. So, oh, JD, is there a body higher than any other empire history other than the British? What?
had more power?
Yeah.
I agree with you. I don't think there was. No, no.
Yeah.
I think they were the highest. I mean, we could go into it in detail and maybe a separate lecture from you or from you, man. I mean, this is such a wonderful seminar because everybody is, and again, everybody who's here is not here casually. I notice afterwards we often get hundreds and often thousands of hits afterwards. But if you look at everybody who comes here has got here the hard way. Everyone here has paid their price in less impressive degrees because they told the truth in their examination papers, because of a lack of tact, because you would not stay quiet when somebody was saying something totally absurd or totally wicked in front of your face. And that's something we all have here, I think. And I think that's our equivalent of the secret handshake that the men make such a big thing of, you know?
Oh, I like
But
this.
no, I'm
Yeah.
with you, JD. I mean, I'm open to suggestions and let's have other arguments. Maybe we should do a separate seminar on this. Were there more powerful empires than the British? I mean, you could say the Roman, you could say the Catholic Church was. Yeah, you might say the Habsburg and the Spanish Empire in Latin America, the Chinese, different aspects of China, and civilizations and culture, ancient Egypt. I mean, it's a fascinating subject, which I suppose by its nature, you could not, if you were being honest, come to an absolute answer of, because none of us would have enough.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think you're right. I think they set not the gold standard, but the infernal standard.
Well,
So
I was
Hitler
actually
admired
asking
them.
about
Mike, oh, I'm sorry. Did you say something, JD?
Yes, please.
I was just saying that my question was specific to the body count.
Oh, I couldn't
Oh,
see that.
yes.
Okay.
Well, again, actually, I can answer that in terms of total death toll and per capita death toll. I think Stalin comes number one in both counts. In terms of total death toll, though not per capita death toll, Mao comes second, Hitler comes third. I think
Does that
yes, it even includes famine, but there's a reason for that, another reason for that, and you're right to be skeptical, and that is populations have soared. The British Empire never had the scale of population, except in China and India, to toy with. That's Stalin and Lenin, and later Mao did. So in every case, you have to look at per capita death figures. And then there's a very strong case for Genghis Khan in the short term. Incredibly, 1 in 200 people across Asia, 1 in 200 people, 4.5 billion people are descended from Genghis Khan personally. I mean, we have the genetic markers there. Error that's really descended from his clan and not just from Temujin himself or what have you. But that's a really small figure. But that's still a phenomenon comment on two factors. For how proportionately honest his slaughter of human beings was. And secondly, how prolific he and his heirs were in banging endless numbers of nubile pregnant young teenage girls at a time when death rate went among infants was more. I mean, modern genetics tracking has only been going on a little more than half a century. We didn't even know it was possible in any real practical terms before the 1970s, and certainly not before 1953. We didn't know anything. We're still at the very earliest stages of this. Which is who are our kids and grandkids who God willing can survive into a survivable world in the future. There are at least potentially enormously bright futures there, but there are all these different factors. But certainly, in terms of what they did kill and how they abused, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Right. Look, as another example of this, because I don't mean the real record here. First, the records of the British colonial police in the last 50 years of the empire. I think you already know this. They have never beaten the archives. And although Britain has not been an imperial power, even in Africa, for now 65 years anywhere, You cannot open the archives. They are on lock and key forever. Why not? Why are they not open? We do know that 10 million people was the first modern industrial genocide, not of the Jewish people, which was real, not of the Russian people at the hands of the Nazis, which is real, starving of 750,000 German women and children and elderly people at the hands of the British naval blockade during World War I, which was real, which Britain was prepared to go to war with the United States in order to uphold in 1915 if they felt they had to. All of those things went on. And but the biggest genocide of modern, the communists came along, was run by the City of London and funded by the Belgians, by gallant little Belgium in Congo. And I've given a lecture on this here about Sir Roger Casement, the great Irish and the British time, who exposed it at the turn of the 20th century, just 120 years ago. It was the first modern genocide, it was the first modern industrial genocide, it was the first genocide to be exposed to the public. The thing I take from history is this: these things are not inherently English, they're not inherently German, they're not inherently Russian or Jewish or American. They're inherently, and that makes them terrifying beyond imagining, because it means you can bomb Prussian militarism out of and gang rape it out of the German people too, as Stalin and the Red Army most certainly deliberately did as a direct act of policy, all the way from the Kremlin in 1945, was monstrous, was nightmarish, was incivil, but it worked. You don't see German men going around trying to conquer the world or exterminate peoples in their way anymore. The British haven't quite learned this lesson. They're still happy to do it when they think they can get away with it indirectly in places like Ukraine. And the public's happy to let them to it. The German people have learned their lesson. The English have not. I mean, but the point is, every culture and every people were all capable of turning a blind eye to this or even cheering it under the wrong circumstances. But having said that, what the British did in the 19th century was on a scale that was quite simply inconceivable in human history before. And I think you are right to ask the question. And the answer ultimately has to be qualified, like I say, because there's other factors here. But basically, you're right. The century, something that no previous people in history had ever been able to do. And they did it. And they exterminated the native peoples of Canada and Australia and southern Patagonia and other parts of the world we conveniently forget about. And they inflicted on hundreds of millions of Chinese people a level of slavery and despair and destitution and misery and sexual enslavement and drug addiction on a scale that no previous human society we have record over anyone anywhere had done anywhere. And when hundreds of British people were slaughtered and they were raped and their bodies were dismembered, and it was horrific in Kanpur and other places in India, during first Indian national rising, which the British quaintly continue to call the Indian Mutiny. If it's a rising against us, it can't be a national rising, it must be only a mutiny. What was their response? Did they look for the dozens or hundreds of perpetrators of to burn and hang them? Well, I'm a Northern Irishman. I would have happily, applauded such an enterprise, and the comparable circumstances still would. But no, they killed a million. You do what had happened, Conver. And in scores of thousands of documented cases, they strapped innocent, terrified Indians, men, women, and children, in front of heavy caliber guns, cannon, and then they blew cannonballs through them. Unfortunately, British industry was at its height in the Industrial Revolution. They never ran out of cannonballs. They never ran out of cannonballs. So ultimately, I was going to heavily qualify your answer, and I suppose you have to, because the British people aren't more evil than anyone else. When they had a chance to kill anyone else, yes, they did so. And then the Germans and the Russians went on an even bigger scale. And what the Japanese did Chinese hatred Filipino peoples and British peoples in World War II was diabolical at levels that even Nazi eyewitnesses noted at the time. What, you should look up, I think I gave a lecture somewhere, and it's something I want to give again, but it's a fascinating topic that nobody remembers. The man who exposed the genocide of 300,000 Chinese people in Nanjing, the good journal of Genghis Khan, in 1937, was the second top-ranking Nazi in the Nazi party in China. At the time, he was an engineer with Siemens. And he didn't really understand what Nazism was really about. He basically thought it's just beating to our savages who kill us all the time. And if they're Jews or Russians, they deserve it anyway. But here, why are our gallant Japanese allies doing these monstrous things to these harmless, innocent Chinese people who are working for them and trying to avoid them? And why are they killing them off like flies? I don't understand it. And he later came to a wider view, but it's a fascinating story. Learn about the good German of Nanjing, the Japanese slaughter in Nanjing in 1937, all the way to the top of the Japanese political establishment at the time. As serious historians who then died young for their efforts, seriously documented. Look up Aris Chang, look up David Bergamini. But the great war crime of Nanjing, so that the #2 ranking Nazi party member in China at the time dedicated the rest of his time in China, and he saved 250,000 Chinese lives from their allies, the Japanese. He was so horrified, not at what the Japanese were doing to Jews. The Japanese weren't even anti-Semitic. They didn't bother killing Jews. But they were so Chinese that the #2 rating Nazi in China, who was a principled anti-Semite himself, very principled anti-Semite, if you call that a principle, he was horrified by it and worked hard to stop it, revered as a hero of the Chinese nation to this day. Not because he was anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish or anti-European or anti-Japanese, but because he worked hard to save so many innocent Chinese lives. The study of history should be a frightening thing. It really should be as frightening as the study of germ warfare. It really is that frightening. So again, look what you've unleashed with your innocent question. And you're right. Thank you, my friend.
Well, I mean, it comes from, I think, the cultural fabric of Malthus, right? And just how that can permeate a society, and Darwin and the different people that
completely
had that.
I was fascinated to discover that Konrad von Hotzendorf, who may well be very seriously implicated in the murder of his own monarch, Hotzendorf wanted, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was a social Darwinist. You look at him, he's a Central European aristocrat, great big curled mustache, 1,000,000 medals. He's not what he appears to be. He appears to be devoutly Christian, because the Habsburg monarchy is the most devoutly Catholic monarchy and traditional monarchy in Europe to an obsessive degree. But he isn't a Christian at all. He doesn't believe in any Christian tenets of mercy or forgiveness or peace or faith. He's a social Darwinist. And because he's also an ignorant asshole, he doesn't, social Darwinism is whatever he wants it to be. It means I can whip all you little peasants to death here. And the English aristocrats who owned Irish estates are like this. Lord Palmerston, who destroys civilizations on a scale that Hitler only dreamed of doing. He kills and gets away with it. He kills 1 million in India, and he reduces the level of the rest of the people of India at a time when industrialization can rise their standard of living to unprecedented levels. On the contrary, in the second half of the 19th century, the people of India in general and the people have been goes to levels of misery and poverty that appall visitors from South America and South Africa and the Middle East. And from Russia. They are appalled at the levels of misery and destitution that the British Empire has reduced the Indian people too. The company was running them, but when the British government was running them and bringing in all the marvels and wonders of industrialization to run them, because industrialization and control of markets by telegraph communication allowed London and Calcutta to be much more efficient vampires. They could rape the people and resources of India and China far more efficient modern communication systems and weapons and machines to do it with. So the good news is you're right, the British were the worst. The bad news is because our technological capabilities have increased, the British are not remotely the worst anymore. They're sinking fast. So many other people want to emulate them.
All right. Mike Blythe has a question. Mike, do you want to say it or should I read it?
Yes, a little bit more than that, but go ahead.
Oh, go for it. Come on, you can do it.
Okay. Well, this has been a fascinating journey here. I didn't realize the extent of manipulation that was going on from all different corners to WW1. So it made me think of this idea of Germany being the victim, as they are often received as, the aggressor and everything. But in this case, yes, they're attacked. Then it made me think of this in a grander scale as to the purpose of it. So because we have Germany also being catapulted into a position they're going to launch. They're backed by U.S. deep state and probably other members. Germany is almost destroyed, or pretty much is at the end of World War II. Russia is almost toppled. They have Germany at the gates, pretty much right at the Kremlin. So we have that secondary, basically almost destructive event happening against Germany. And now even today, we have economic discussions going on today in Germany with the severing of power and so on from Russia to Germany. So there's just a lot of fallout in World War I that I didn't realize. It is also the shadow of the czars being extinguished, communism, and I look at this as the grand chessboard now in a timeline, or from a time perspective, where you see Russia and Germany sometimes being pitted against each other, but always involved in the wars. And as Martin says, you come out there lesser than what you came in as, and your whole political systems are thrown into turmoil. So I'm wondering if Martin thinks that this is, one of the purposes of World War I, or the ultimate desires for World War I.
Again, another outstanding question that I have to give either a multi-pronged answer for, or a soggy, well, it's everything and nothing at the same time answer for. Because I don't think there is a simple answer. I mean, I was introduced to this as a 14-year-old boy in a wonderful school in Belfast by wonderful teachers. I'm not going to sneer at my teachers. Everything I have was built on amazingly wonderful foundations they built, and they were overwhelmingly good and moral and decent and kind, generous, that too, but also above all else, honest and superb scholars and students of scholars, men and women alike. And yes, I found afterwards in the 1960s, new levels of questioning was brought into this. At first, and then decades later, you learn other stuff that you didn't know before. And then you see other stuff that you think is absurd and turns out to be absurd, other stuff that you think is absurd and turns out to be alarmingly accurate. But then you have other people countering it afterwards. There was a great liberal Dutch historian who, as a historian, I actually quite useless. Now I forget his name. It'll come back to me, pop into head at some point. But he was a liberal Dutch historian. But he wasn't a great historian of Dutch history. He was a 20th century, nice, well-meaning liberal Democrat, but he interpreted everything through his own narrow lens and couldn't see anything else through anybody else's lens. But he did say one wonderful thing in debates he had with other historians. And he said, history is a debate. Actually, he's tacit admitting the superiority of a great historian philosopher who I know he loathed himself at the time, and that is the great journal, because Hegel saw different forces in history conflicting with each other and changing and evolving over the years, and either annihilating each other or joining together or being replaced by new successive generations of expressions of values and human understandings of the world that they hadn't dreamed of before. And you see over the years how evolutionary forces can mellow into tolerant forces over the years. How there's a Christianity of the Crusades that's absolutely merciless, and they're Christianity of each other, happily psychopathically in 1914 and exterminate the world. And you have other deeply moral, courageous understanding come from all different kinds of Christianity. And you find the same developments in Judaism, of course, and in Buddhism and in Islam and in other faiths too. We're talking about, as Hegel understood, organic forces here. So what means a movement that is hugely powerful and significant over here develop into something quite different 50 years later, or certainly 500 years later. It's the first point. The second point is there are so many different factors operating here. You can make an excellent case for New York banks and certainly City of London banks. World War I, and I've seen it made. You can make an excellent case for deep states alone that are out of control and doing things that there is no indication that the City of London bankers know anything whatsoever about at the time. I mean, and also, so to move very carefully here, Margaret Thatcher revived the power of the City of London very simply and ruthlessly. I mean, she really is an Alexander. A great personality. Remember the Gordian knot? Nobody can unravel the Gordian knot. So what does young Alexander do? He's an intellectual. He doesn't listen to any of the endless arguing Athens. He doesn't listen to either the school of Plato or the school of Aristotle or the school of Heraclitus or anybody else. He simply takes out his sword. This is the Stalin approach to history, right? No person, no problem. No, it really doesn't work that way. I mean, Hitler exterminated almost all the Jews of Europe. I think there are no Jews today because they're Juden around thanks to Hitler. The idea of being Jewish weirdly reawakes, and people can slaughter more dissidents to his government than any other tyrant, including Hitler himself, has done in history. And yet within 36 years of Stalin, his system has totally collapsed. And I was visiting it for the last 6 years after it collapsed. And bad as it was, and believe me, it was depressing and infinitely worse to live anywhere in the West, Brezhnev or his successor, Soviet Union, at least until Gorbachev started loosening things up. There's no question that the Soviet Union, even under Brezhnev and certainly under Gorbachev, was not thank Soviet Union under Gorbachev. And virtually everybody who knew had survived from the one to the other would tell you so. So this is the difficulty. Are there lots of different powerful forces there operating? Yes, of course there are. Are some of them much more powerful and toxic than others? Yes, there are. Can we untangle all of them? I can tell you this to everybody's satisfaction. No, we cannot. Because whatever you will untangle will never be to my total satisfaction or mine to yours. And we're the least of it. We're friends. We work together. There's all those people out there who are ready to condemn anything either of us come up with, especially if we agree on it. Peter Geil, that was the Dutch guy I'm talking about. The Dutch liberal historian Peter Geil, G-E-Y-L, was right. History, to be honest and accurate, can never be final. It is always going to be a debate. It is always going to be a Hegelian process of argument, of a dialectic, and we need it to be. So that when we go to the specifics, were there great power City of London factors hugely involved here? Oh, yes, definitely. Were they influencing factors 2014? Enormously. I would recommend you here again the recent work by my friend Pelly Neuroth Taylor, who give me of things infinitely better than me. And there are even a couple of trailers from what I've been taking today that I would further add. Remember, I told you in 1914 the Tsar would have not have gone to war if Rasputin was with him. Why was Rasputin not with him? Very simple reason. A nun stabbed him. Didn't succeed in killing him, but she was an ex-prostitute. She stabbed him, and she kept him out of commission and thousands of miles from the imperial summer palace where the decisions of peace and war were being taken. So although he ran pleading the Tsar not to go to war and signed a decree, he failed to stop him. That one stabbing changed the course of human history. Why did she do it? She listened to the priest who was her handler. Who was this priest? You find his name in Wikipedia. Zunkovich, if I recall correctly, his name. And I don't have to look it up. Zunkovich. It's there on Gregory Putin. He himself has clear, huge, massive family ties from his own aristocratic background. He orders, the secret police wants war with Germany and wants it now, and Rasputin is standing in the way, so he must be eliminated. But once happens, crucial guy issues the order to murder Rasputin, and it doesn't murder him, but it silences him, right? There's another tiny little spot in history which has never been covered up. Nobody bothered covering it up. But another narrative, and that is this guy lives until 1952 in New York City. He is allowed into America, and he has a comfortable life in America. From that city and look after him for the rest of his life till 1952. Some people have long memories. Why? And you look at the weird cross-dressing who personally murdered Rasputin. A real creep. And somehow he's spirit as well. He survives, comes to New York, or even in the 1920s and 30s, cross-dressing and being transsexual. Isn't this disapproved of? As is by the Orthodox Church in St. Peter 16. And he has people he finds to look after him so that he can live in honored comfort for the rest of his life for decades afterwards as well. So
Marty, you have to put your microphone back up.
Oh, yes. I can hear in the other ear, but it's better that. No, you're right, Magdalene. Of course, it's better to have both. So you actually have a repeating pattern here. You don't financial establishments protecting the communists, but you do find them protecting the Mensheviks, the same soft liberals who they back in Russia today, who they backed in Eastern Europe in 1989. You do find the same people backing them. They want a nice, liberal, global, one-state Soros international order, and they actually part of this order, which does intend to involve drug trafficking, organized crime on an enormous scale. I mean, another factor, just in passing, and it's huge and it's disgusting and it's horrible, and it was most of all, it was there. What was the largest human prostitution trading ring in history? Well, a good case enslavement of the peoples of Black West Africa at the hands of their own black rulers, who then sold them off for little jewels and gewgaws to British and American traders in the 19th century. We're talking about the regular slave trade, right? Of course we are, to America. But there was another one on an even vaster scale. Well, not terrible scale. And both the victims and the people who perpetrated are politically incorrect. More than 1 million innocent Jewish Orthodox, devoutly religious, with naively idiotic family backgrounds, are set to arrange marriages tourist visitors from Latin America and South Africa throughout the United States. At least 10,000 of these arranged marriages are made every year for years from 1840 up to 1940 when the Holocaust ended it. And every one of those pearl girls is sold into prostitution, every kind of white slavery in the brothels of South America and South Africa along the routes of the British Empire. And into Irish gangs, which take advantage of the new technology, electronic telegraph communications. And they're also dealing with deep communities who hate and fear the Christian, Russian, and Orthodox empires, which run the countries and which don't approve of mass prostitution. So these poor fools think they're in lives of prosperity and happiness away from the fear of starvation. And most of them are dead by being murdered or tortured, or in snuff killings, or just from the looming diseases that they have by the time they're 35 or certainly below the age of 40. And they're left to starve to death, and only their fellow Jewish prostitutes. But who is enslaving these poor girls? 10,000 a year for 100 years, and sometimes the figures are higher. Why, it is Jewish gangs, of course, of mobsters and pimpsters. And are these Jewish gangsters and mobsters and pimpsters uniquely evil and stupid? Even evil? No. You find the same pattern among later generations of Irish gangsters and Chinese tongue gangsters coming to San Francisco and to the port of London, and Jamaican gangsters bringing crack cocaine into the United States in the 1980s. And apparent people who look like Romanians, incidentally, the very formidable Mexican cocaine cartels. Now, when I tell you this, I actually have academic credentials. I've also served over the years. I don't know if I'm still officially listed as it. When they hear me talk, they say they would probably take me off it. But I was an accredited professor of transnational crime, taking postgraduate courses on this at an accredited university in Washington, D.C. in my 50s and 60s. The figures for this are there. Just alone, you know where the main documentation comes from? It comes from Jewish, liberal, high-minded, upper-class Jewish liberals, tea parties in London and New York, and had gone to private schools and were well brought up and really believed in little things like the Ten Commandments and sexual morality, and were horrified to discover maid servants who were working for them, little girls who were working for them, who had been victims of these organizations or had knew of family members who had been murdered or disappeared from these organizations. And it was these groups who got together, and from the 1880s to the 1940s, they got together and performed the only serious national governments from Argentina to Central Europe to stop doing this. And it was always too difficult to do because, as we see with the Mexican cartels to this day, and as we saw with the CIA working with the Tanaf in Sicily and the Camorra in Naples after World War II, connections that originally led to the assassination of President Kennedy, which in strong Naples and connect. Pretty soon, remarkably soon, you reach a takeoff point where the private organized crime cartels that cross borders have far greater result in both finance and in lethal focused killing power than the people they're up against. These gangs were only finally destroyed by the communists. And when the entire problem was destroyed by the Nazis, it flourished until the Nazi Holocaust in 1940. They didn't stop till then. There was only one person who ever got better of the mafia in Sicily and brought peace and security and prosperity lastingly while he was there to the people of southern Italy and Sicily. And who? Benito Mussolini. Exactly. Because about the norms of the liberal rule of law, and he knew how to fight the mafia, and it worked. And the communists were able to do it doing something else. They throw so many people into their own slavery systems in the Gulag, and Solzhenitsyn writes about this a great deal, that most of the old arms survive and flourish in the Gulag because they can do business and coexist with the Soviet secret police or with any other secret police much more and comfortably and evenly than any of us who are raised on civilized values can. And what does do in the face of all this horrific stuff? I think you do what we are all doing here. You try and maintain and spread the levels of truth and decency and morality, one step at a time, how small it is, however much all the sneering liberals sneer at you for the hell which they themselves, in fact, created.
Wow. Blow my mind. I was like, oh my God. Okay, you blow my mind every time. There is JT has another question, follow-up. I do have to tell people that I have to leave very soon because I have another Zoom meeting this evening and something else to do before. JD, do you want to pose your question? And Marty,
Sure.
you have to make it short.
Well, that's mission impossible. It's all your fault, JD.
Sorry. Question was, do you see sort of a line? Like, how does Mackinder and his geographic pivot factor into World War I and onward as he outlined the heartland theory? And does that go through Brzezinski in the 1990s and even what I might say out of those through in Ukraine today?
Yes, absolutely, all the way. I'm asked to make it short, mischievously, and of course, there's much, much more I can say, and I know much more you would say. I think we're in full agreement on all of this already. And Hitler, Karl Haushofer, Hitler's influential strategian, the genius who told Hitler to conquer all of Eurasia. Well, how did that work out for you, Adolf? Right? That's the point about these geniuses. They're not. They're monstrous horses' asses. The first Admiral Mahan in the drive to the Pacific, an American Haushofer going in the other direction. Exactly the same thing. Oh, it's all so simple. We just go, nobody will stop. Brzezinski, a Polish aristocrat who hated all, he didn't hate Jewish people. He befriended me. He didn't hate black people. He befriended Barack Obama and recommended him David Rockefeller. They were friends to the end of Brzezinski's life. In all the conventional ways we're geared to look for, Brzezinski was indeed a tolerant, generous man. Except he was Polish. His hatred for all, and I knew the man personally and well and dined with him on many occasions. His hatred for ordinary Russian people was genocidal. But again, another chessboard nut. They're all chessboard nuts. None of them play the Chinese game of Go. The British and the Russians played Go, and they got the largest empires in history, and they never had to fight battles that lost more than a few hundred men on the side to win them. What does it tell you? The poor French and the Germans, and later the Russians too, going in the wrong direction, study Clausewitz. They study German theory. They kill millions of poor people each time in every direction. To what good purpose? None whatsoever. Ulysses S. Grant was actually a Go guy who's falsely accused chess player. He's up against the Confederate slavers, pro-British Empire, and chess-playing gentlemen, every one of them. Grant was a poker man. And also he was a Westerner. He understood Go. Go where your enemy isn't. Isolate him. While he's holding out his chess strongholds like Fort Donelson or Vicksburg, you don't give a fuck. Just go around them. Conquer the entire rest of the West. All of a sudden, the most important Napoleon himself has a tiny little dot on the map left at Fort Donelson or Shiloh or Vicksburg. And we've got all the rest of the West. We've cut you off from Trans-Mississippi by our gunboats because you're playing chess and we're playing Go. And I'm playing poker. But you're a Virginia gentleman. You're pondering the chessboard every stage. If I move a pawn here, it brings me to Gettysburg. Wow. And where's that going to get you now? No. Play Go, play poker, throw over the chessboard. Haushofer is full of shit. And yes, he led by their noses all the way to Stalingrad. Some master race. Thank you.
Thank you so very, very much, Marty. Again, as always, and it's just amazing how you can retain all this information and then present it to us in a coherent fashion again too. So
look again. You and your hubby have some. And you know me when I'm not joking, Magdalena. You make me sound so wonderful and brilliant and
you
planned.
are
It's
wonderful
all
and brilliant.
it's a chaotic process.
Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us today for the Rising Tide Foundation, and we hope to see you next Sunday again. And thanks again, Marty.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, dear friends.